Tonight, you're going to do something rare, something powerful. You're going to let go, not by effort or willpower, but by listening. Over the next 3 hours, I'll share calming Zen stories and gentle Buddhist wisdom that help you release what no longer serves you: thoughts, tension, expectations, the weight of the day. These teachings have soothed restless minds for centuries, not by fixing anything, but by showing a different way to see. Here, there's nothing to achieve, nothing to figure out, just presence, just breath. Even if your thoughts have been loud, even if your heart feels heavy, this time is for you. And these stories are the medicine. Each one is a quiet invitation to loosen your grip, to soften, to surrender, to remember that peace doesn't come from controlling life, but from meeting it with awareness, with stillness, with compassion. As you listen, your body will begin to unwind, your mind will slowly release its grasp, and a gentle space will open inside you, the kind of space where peace naturally enters. So make yourself comfortable, allow your shoulders to drop, take one deep, conscious breath, and as you exhale, feel yourself beginning to let go. Let's begin with our first calming Zen story. In today's busy life, holding on to too much can make us feel heavy and tired. But the gentle wisdom of Zen and Buddhism teaches us a different way, one of letting go. In this collection of calming stories, each one shares a quiet truth to help us release stress, worries, and fear. These peaceful tales remind us that we don't need to carry everything. When we let go, even for a moment, we make space for stillness, kindness, and peace to enter. True freedom begins within, and each story helps guide us there, step by step, breath by breath. The sound of one leaf falling. In a quiet forest temple, far from the noise of the world, a young monk approached his master with troubled eyes. "My mind is never still," he said. "Even when the forest is silent, my thoughts are loud. How can I find peace?" The master did not answer with words. He simply pointed to the tall trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. "Sit here," he said, "and listen, not to the many leaves, but to the sound of one leaf falling." The young monk obeyed. Each day he sat beneath the trees, trying to do as he was told, but his mind refused to listen. Thoughts of failure, worry, old memories, and future fears filled his head. The forest was full of life, birds chirping, branches moving, insects humming. He strained to hear something simple, something quiet. Days passed, and still he heard nothing that seemed like one single leaf. He began to grow restless and discouraged. But one early dawn, when mist hung low and the world seemed to pause, a tiny sound touched his ear, soft, almost nothing at all. A single dry leaf slipped from its branch and drifted down. It made no real noise, but in that moment, everything inside him stopped. It wasn't the sound itself that brought peace. It was his presence, his stillness. For the first time, his mind wasn't chasing thoughts or pushing them away. It was just there, like the leaf, moving gently in its own time, needing nothing. He returned to his master, not with words, but with a look of quiet understanding. The master smiled. "Peace isn't found in silence alone," he said softly. "It is found In the one moment you fully hear, fully feel, and let all else fall away. Tears rose in the monk's eyes, not from sadness, but from the gentle release of all the noise he had carried for so long. The single falling leaf became a doorway, not into escape, but into the deep stillness already within him. Moral of the story: peace begins when we stop trying to hold everything at once. Like hearing one leaf fall in a forest, calm arrives when we give full attention to one moment. In that stillness, the noise fades and the heart opens. The Master's empty teacup. A scholar once traveled across distant mountains to meet a Zen master known for his deep wisdom. The scholar had read many books, studied many teachings, and carried a strong belief that he already understood the truth. Still, he sought out the master, hoping to receive final confirmation of his knowledge. When he arrived at the temple, the master welcomed him warmly and invited him to sit for tea. As they settled into the quiet room, the scholar began speaking quickly, sharing his thoughts, quoting sacred texts, explaining what he believed about the mind, the self, and enlightenment. He spoke with confidence, eager to prove he was worthy of the master's time. The master listened kindly, but said nothing. Instead, he lifted the teapot and began pouring tea into the scholar's cup. He poured until the cup was full. Then he kept pouring. The tea spilled over the sides, soaking the table and dripping to the floor. Startled, the scholar cried out, "Stop! Can't you see the cup is full? It can't hold any more." The master gently set the teapot down and looked at the scholar with calm eyes. "You are like this cup," he said, "so full of your own opinions and knowledge that nothing more can enter. If you truly wish to learn, you must first empty your cup." The scholar sat in stunned silence. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the overflowing tea. In that quiet moment, he realized that his pride, his certainty, and his desire to be right had closed him off from true understanding. He had come seeking wisdom, but his mind had been too crowded to receive it. That day, he did not speak again. He simply sat, quietly holding the warm cup in his hands, letting the master's words settle deep into his heart, like tea leaves drifting to the bottom of a still bowl. Moral of the story: true learning begins with humility. When we believe we know everything, we block ourselves from deeper wisdom. Only by emptying the mind, like an open teacup, can we receive new insight, peace, and understanding. A monk's last breath. In a quiet village nestled beneath the mountains, there lived an old monk known for his gentleness and silence. He rarely spoke, but his presence brought comfort. People said he walked like wind through trees, barely noticed, yet deeply felt. For many years he swept the temple grounds, tended to the gardens, and smiled at those who passed. His life was simple, his heart undisturbed. One evening, as the sky turned gold and shadows stretched long, the monk sat beneath a flowering tree. Other monks gathered nearby, sensing something different in the air. The old monk folded his hands in his lap, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. A young disciple stepped closer and whispered, "Master, are you unwell?" The old monk opened his eyes gently and smiled. "This breath may be my last," he said calmly, "and I am not afraid." The monks around him grew silent. Some looked down, others began to weep. But the old monk only watched the falling petals and breathed once more, slowly and peacefully. His eyes remained soft, and there was no fear, no tension, only presence, only love. A tearful novice asked, "Master, how can you face death so peacefully?" The old monk whispered, "I have lived each day like a breath, nothing to hold, nothing to fear. When you hold tightly, you suffer, but when you let go, even the last breath is gentle." With those words, his chest rose one final time and fell like a leaf returning to earth. He passed not in struggle, but in surrender. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. In the silence, something sacred settled in the hearts of those who witnessed it. They didn't feel loss, only stillness. His passing was not an end, it was a teaching. Days later, the young disciples sat where the monk had passed and breathed deeply, just once, with no fear. He finally understood. Moral of the story: peace does not come from avoiding death, but from accepting life fully. When we live each breath with awareness and let go of attachment, even our final moment can be a return, not to darkness, but to stillness, grace, and freedom. Sand between the fingers. On a long walk through the desert, a young monk and his teacher journeyed in silence under the heat of the sun. The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, and the monk, though quiet on the outside, was full of questions inside. His heart ached with longing for answers, for control, for certainty. As they stopped to rest near a quiet dune, the young monk turned to the teacher and asked, "Why does peace always seem to slip away from me? I try to hold on to calm, to joy, even to love, but it never lasts. It always disappears." The teacher looked at him kindly and said nothing. Instead, he knelt down and scooped a handful of sand into his palm. Then, without a word, he began to close his hand tightly around it. As his fist clenched, the fine grains began slipping out through his fingers, faster and faster, until almost nothing remained. Then he opened his palm and scooped another handful. This time he left his hand open, relaxed. The sand rested gently on his skin, barely moving. None of it slipped away. The young monk watched closely, his eyes widening. He understood before the teacher spoke, but still, the master said softly, "The more you try to grip peace, the more it escapes. Hold it gently, and it stays." The monk lowered his head, ashamed. He realized he had been clinging to every good feeling, afraid to lose it, afraid to let things change. In trying to make joy last, he had crushed it. In fearing the end of peace, he had driven it away. As the sun began to set, they continued walking. The monk let the wind brush against his skin, let his breath flow in and out without forcing it. He noticed the silence, the warmth, the feeling of the sand beneath his feet. For the first time, he didn't try to hold the moment. He simply lived in it. Moral of the story: peace, joy, and love are not meant to be held tightly. Like sand, the more we cling, the more we lose. But with an open hand and an open heart, what is meant to stay will stay, and what passes will do so gently. The cloud that let go of the sky. High above the mountains, where the air is thin and the wind speaks in whispers, there once drifted a cloud who longed to stay in the sky forever. She was soft and white, glowing gently in the morning light. Below her, rivers shimmered, forests stretched wide, and tiny villages moved through their days. The cloud felt proud to float so high, untouched by the troubles of the world. "I will never fall," she whispered. "I belong up here, where everything feels light and free." But as time passed, the sun grew warmer and the cloud grew heavier. She began to darken, her body filling with moisture and weight. She resisted, she tightened, she clung to the sky with all her strength. "I must stay," she cried silently. "I don't want to change." But the sky, wide and calm, said nothing. It simply let her be. One day, she could hold on no longer. Her form trembled, and she began to fall, not all at once, but slowly, gently, drop by drop. She wept as she let go, believing she had failed, believing she was lost. But something beautiful happened. Her tears became rain, falling over the thirsty earth. Fields drank deeply, flowers opened, children danced in the streets, lakes rippled and filled, life stirred. The cloud had not disappeared. She had become something new, something giving, something needed. Later, as mist rose from the land and returned to the sky, she felt herself rising again, not as the same cloud, but as part of something greater. She was no longer clinging. She was moving, transforming, returning. She whispered to herself, letting go was not the end, it was the way. Far below, a young monk watched the rain fall and smiled. He had been holding tightly to a love that had passed, a dream that had faded, and a future that no longer matched his path. But seeing the rain reminded him, nothing truly leaves us, it only changes form. Moral of the story, letting go is not the same as losing. Like a cloud that releases the rain, we must sometimes surrender what we cling to in order to nourish life, within us and around us. In that surrender, we discover that change is not an end, but a beginning. No path, only steps. In a quiet mountain monastery, a young monk paced along a narrow stone trail. His heart was heavy with doubt. Day after day, he trained, meditated, listened to teachings, but still, he felt lost. One morning, after meditation, he approached the old Zen master and said, "Master, I want to reach enlightenment. I want to find the path, but I don't know where it begins." The master looked up from sweeping the steps and said gently, "There is no path. There are only steps." The young monk furrowed his brow. "But if there's no path, how will I know where to go?" The master smiled faintly and handed the broom to him. "Sweep," he said, "just this one step." So the monk swept the stairs. Then he swept the garden. He cooked the evening meal. He bowed with the others. Day by day, he lived in silence, still waiting for the path to appear. But it never did. Not in visions, not in sudden understanding. One evening, the young monk sat alone beneath the stars. The wind was quiet. His hands were tired from work, his feet sore from walking, but his mind was still. In that deep stillness, a quiet thought rose in him, not a voice, not a teaching, but a knowing. He had already been walking the path all along. There had been no need for a perfect direction, no great map, no final goal far away. Every step, Every breath, every act of care had been the way. The sweeping, the cooking, the walking, the sitting, all of it had shaped his heart. He had been searching for something grand, but the truth had been in the small, ordinary steps he had taken every day. He returned to the Master with tears in his eyes. The old man looked at him and said, "Now you see. The path is not something to find. It is something you make with your steps." Moral of the story: there is no perfect path to peace or wisdom waiting in the distance. It is found in the small steps we take each day, with attention, with care, with presence. Life reveals its truth not all at once, but in each simple moment we choose to walk it. A bell that rings without striking. In a mountain monastery hidden among pine trees, there stood a large bronze bell. So ancient, its surface was marked by time, yet its form was perfect. Strangely, it had not been struck in many years. Travelers often asked why the monks no longer rang it. It was said the bell had once echoed across valleys, calling all beings to stillness. Now it stood silent, untouched. One day, a curious novice asked the abbot, "Why don't we ring the bell anymore? Isn't it meant to call us to meditation?" The old abbot smiled gently and replied, "Some bells are not meant to be struck. Their sound already lives in the silence." The novice was confused. He had heard the bell only once, years ago when he first arrived. Its deep tone had moved something in him, a sound so pure it seemed to come from within, not just the air around him. But now it stood still, collecting dust. That night, the novice went to the meditation hall alone. The moonlight bathed the floor. The bell stood nearby, motionless. As he sat in silence, something strange happened. He heard it. The sound of the bell, soft and distant, not with his ears, but in his chest. It was not a sound made by metal, but by memory, by presence, by stillness. He stayed there for hours, unmoving, listening. Not to noise, but to silence so deep it held everything. He understood now what the abbot meant. The bell no longer needed to be struck. It had done its work. Its echo had settled into the hearts of those who listened deeply. When he told the abbot the next morning, the old monk only nodded. "When we chase noise, we miss the deeper sound," he said. "But when we become still, we begin to hear what was always there." The novice no longer asked about the bell. From that day forward, he began to carry its silence inside him wherever he went. Moral of the story: true awakening doesn't always come with noise or drama. Like a bell that rings without striking, the deepest wisdom speaks in silence. When we quiet the mind, we hear not with ears, but with the heart. And what we hear transforms us. The lantern and the wind. Long ago, in a village that lay between mountains and sea, an old monk carried a small lantern everywhere he went. It was made of thin paper and a simple wooden frame. Its flame was gentle, never too bright, but steady. People would watch him walk slowly through the streets at night, the lantern casting a soft glow along his path. One evening, as a storm approached, a young boy ran up to the monk. "Master, why do you carry such a fragile lantern? The wind will blow it out. Why not use something stronger, something safer?" The monk stopped and looked at the boy with kind eyes. He held out the lantern between them. The wind had begun to pick up, and the flame inside flickered. "This lantern," he said softly, "is like the human heart, gentle, fragile, and full of light. But it's not strength that keeps it lit. It's care." They continued walking as the wind rose. Leaves danced across the ground, and the sky grew dark. The boy watched as the monk cupped his hand around the lantern, shielding it from the gusts. With each step, he adjusted, not fighting the wind, but moving with it. The flame trembled, but it never went out. They passed others along the road, people rushing, covering their heads, trying to shield themselves from the storm. Many carried no light. The monk's lantern, though small, offered them warmth. A few paused, breathing more slowly in its glow. As the storm raged, the boy asked, "Aren't you afraid the wind will blow it out?" The monk smiled and shook his head. "Fear puts out more flames than wind ever could. But when you protect what is soft with love, not force, it endures." The boy stayed beside the monk until they reached the temple. That night, he could not stop thinking about the little flame that had kept burning, not because it was powerful, but because it was cared for. Moral of the story: our inner light is delicate, like a lantern in the wind, but when we guard it with gentleness and patience, it can survive any storm. True strength isn't about overpowering life's winds. It's about walking through them with steady love and mindful care. The silence behind the mantra. In a temple nestled near the sea, a young monk sat in morning meditation, his voice softly repeating a sacred mantra. Each day, he chanted for hours, believing that the sound itself would bring him closer to peace. The mantra was beautiful, flowing like waves, words passed down for generations, filled with deep meaning. But still, something inside him felt restless. Though his lips moved with devotion, his heart remained unsettled. One morning, he approached the elder monk and asked, "Why do I still feel lost, even when I chant the sacred words with care?" The elder monk looked at him with kindness and said, "Come with me." They walked in silence down to the shore where the sea breathed slowly against the sand. The elder asked the young monk to sit and begin his mantra again. The monk obeyed, letting the words rise from his lips. But before long, the elder raised a hand and gently said, "Now stop, just listen." The monk grew still. The ocean spoke in soft rhythms. Seagulls cried in the wind. But beneath it all, there was a deeper quiet, something beneath the sounds, around the sounds. The elder whispered, "That is what the mantra is pointing to. The words are not the truth. They are a path. But the truth is in the silence behind the words." The young monk closed his eyes. He felt it now, a vast stillness holding everything, even his thoughts. The mantra had become a doorway, and now, with no words at all, he felt peace beginning to grow. Not because of sound, but because of space. Tears touched his face, and he whispered, "I've been holding too tightly to the words, haven't I?" The elder smiled. Words can guide, but silence transforms. From that day forward, the monk still chanted, but not to fill the air with sound. He chanted to step into silence. And more often, he would simply sit with his breath, letting the quiet teach him. Moral of the story: words can lead us, but they are not the destination. Like a mantra, sound can calm the mind, but it is the silence behind the sound where true peace is found. When we listen deeply, we begin to hear not just what is spoken, but what is eternal, the bamboo that did not break. During a fierce storm season in a remote mountain valley, heavy rains and wild winds tore through the land. Trees cracked and fell, branches snapped like twigs, crops were ruined, and even the strong stone walls of the village shook. But in the monastery garden, something unexpected happened. One thing stood tall while all else was damaged, a slender bamboo stalk. When the storm passed, a young monk walked through the garden, his heart heavy with the loss. He saw the bamboo swaying gently, still rooted, still rising. Confused, he went to his master and asked, "Why did the bamboo survive when everything else broke? It's so thin, so soft. I thought it would be the first to fall." The master looked out toward the garden and replied, "Bamboo does not fight the wind. It does not stand stiff or proud. It bows, it bends, and because it yields, it does not break." The young monk sat in silence, letting the words sink in. He thought of his own struggles, how he had tried so hard to be strong, to resist pain, to hold everything in. But inside, he often felt cracked. He had mistaken hardness for strength. He had believed that unbending meant surviving. That evening, he returned to the garden alone. He knelt before the bamboo and watched it sway with the breeze. He saw how it moved with grace, not weakness. It didn't cling to stillness or fight the motion. It trusted the wind and let itself be shaped by it. He felt something inside himself soften. He didn't need to keep pretending to be unshaken. He didn't need to hide his sadness, his fear, or his tiredness. What he needed was to learn how to bend, to allow life to move through him without breaking him apart. As the moonlight bathed the garden in silver light, the young monk whispered to himself, "I will be like the bamboo, not hard, not hollow, but rooted, open, and ready to bend when the storm comes." Moral of the story: true strength is not about resistance, it is about flexibility. Like bamboo, the heart that can bend without breaking, the mind that can yield without fear, these are the ones that endure. In softness, we find the courage to survive life's storms with grace. Rice Bowl of the Moon. Long ago, in a village cradled between mountains, there lived a humble monk who owned nothing but a wooden rice bowl. Each morning, he would walk barefoot through the village, accepting whatever food was given to him, sometimes plenty, sometimes just a few grains. He never asked for more and never complained. One evening, as he washed his bowl beneath the soft light of the moon, a wealthy merchant passed by and watched in confusion. "You live with so little," the merchant said. "Don't you ever wish for more? A proper meal? A roof that doesn't leak? New robes instead of those patched ones?" The monk held up his bowl, empty and clean, catching the moon's reflection inside it. "This bowl holds exactly what I need," he said, "and tonight it even holds the moon." The merchant laughed, thinking it was a trick. "But that's just an illusion. The moon isn't in your bowl." The monk smiled gently. "So it is with everything we try to hold: money, comfort, power, even love. We chase and grasp, thinking it will fill us. But in truth, the moment is already full. Even an empty bowl can hold the beauty of the whole sky if we are still enough to see it." The merchant grew quiet. He had spent his whole life filling his house with treasures. but he had never once seen the moon inside a bowl. He watched as the monk bowed to the night sky and placed the bowl on a stone, empty yet complete. Days passed, and the merchant began to walk through his home differently. He ate more slowly, listened more deeply. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd place a simple bowl of water on his windowsill just to watch the moon settle inside it. He never became a monk, but something inside him softened. The hunger he once felt for more began to fade. In its place, a quiet peace grew, like moonlight in an empty bowl. Moral of the story: true contentment doesn't come from having more, but from needing less. Even an empty bowl can reflect the moon. When we stop grasping and start noticing, we find that life's deepest beauty is already within reach. A visitor at the temple gate. On a cold and misty morning, just as the sun began to rise, a stranger arrived at the gate of an old mountainside temple. His robe was torn, his feet were bare, and his face was marked by the long road he had traveled. He knocked gently 3 times. Inside, the young gatekeeper, still new to temple life, heard the sound and peeked through the crack in the gate. He saw the weary traveler and hesitated. "Who are you?" he asked. The stranger bowed. "I am no one important. I carry nothing. I seek nothing but rest." Unsure, the young monk ran to the head monk and explained. "A man is outside. He looks poor, tired, maybe even dangerous. Should I send him away?" The elder monk closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Go and open the gate, not just for him, but for yourself." The young monk returned slowly. He opened the gate, his heart pounding. The visitor stepped in, bowed again, and asked for nothing. No food, no help, only a place to sit in silence. He was led to the garden, where he sat quietly for hours, saying nothing, disturbing no one. As the day passed, the monk grew curious. He brought the visitor warm tea and some rice. The man accepted with a gentle nod, his eyes full of calm. Later, as the sun began to set, the visitor stood, bowed once more, and turned to leave. "Thank you," he said softly. "You did not just open the gate, you opened your fear." After he left, the young monk remained still, staring at the space the man had occupied. For some reason, tears welled in his eyes. He realized the man hadn't been a burden. He had been a mirror, a chance to see his own doubt, his own fear of the unknown. That night, the monk wrote in his journal, "Compassion begins when we stop guarding our hearts." Moral of the story: often, the visitor we fear is the lesson we need. When we open the gate of the heart, not just to others, but to uncertainty, we welcome in not danger, but growth, kindness, and the quiet wisdom of letting go. The stillness before the rain. In a small forest temple, a young monk often sat on the old wooden porch, watching the clouds drift across the sky. One afternoon, he noticed the air begin to change. The breeze slowed, the birds quieted, and the light dimmed softly. Thick clouds gathered above the treetops. Rain was coming, but it had not yet begun. The monk closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Something about that moment, right before the rain, felt powerful, almost sacred. A silence filled the space around him, not empty, but full of waiting. He felt his heart begin to slow, matching the rhythm of the still world. Later that day, he approached the head monk and asked, "Why does it feel so peaceful before the rain begins?" The old monk smiled gently and replied, "Because the earth knows how to wait. In the stillness before the rain, nothing is being done, but everything is preparing. The trees are still, the animals pause, the wind softens. It is a quiet surrender." The young monk looked confused. "But isn't the rain what brings life? Why is the stillness before it so important?" The elder placed his hand on the railing and said, "Because that stillness teaches us how to receive. Not everything in life must be active. Some of the most important moments happen when we simply wait, with patience, with presence, without rushing." That night, the monk returned to the porch. Rain had not yet come, but again the world felt hushed, holding its breath. For the first time, the monk stopped searching for meaning. He didn't chase his thoughts or try to force understanding. He just sat, open and quiet, like the forest itself. And when the first drops finally began to fall, he felt no excitement, no disappointment. Just peace, as if the waiting had been the lesson all along. He began to understand that life is not only found in what we do, but in how we are, in the still spaces between doing. Moral of the story: there is wisdom in the waiting. Like the quiet before the rain, stillness prepares the heart to receive. When we stop rushing and learn to pause, peace flows in gently, soft as the first drop touching the earth. The man who let go of his name. In a bustling city surrounded by stone walls and market noise, there lived a man known by all. He was respected, praised, and called by many titles: scholar, leader, son, father, teacher. Wherever he went, people greeted him with honor. His name carried weight, and his reputation followed him like a shadow. But in the quiet of the night, when no one called his name, he felt something strange, a heaviness, a sense that he no longer knew who he truly was beneath the titles. He had become the image others saw, but not the soul he once felt inside. One morning, without telling anyone, he left the city and walked toward the mountains. Days turned to weeks as he wandered from village to village, no longer introducing himself, no longer explaining his past. When asked who he was, he would simply smile and say, "Just a traveler." At first, it felt like a loss. No one bowed to him. No one praised his wisdom. But as time passed, he felt a strange lightness. Without a name to defend, without a role to protect, he was free to simply be. He worked in the fields, shared meals with strangers, and slept beneath trees. He watched the sky change, listened to birdsong, and began to feel a peace he had never known in the city. He was no longer performing, he was living. One day, a young boy asked him, "Why don't you tell people your name?" The man bent down, smiled, and replied, "A name is useful, but it is not who I am. When I let go of my name, I found something greater: silence, stillness, and the joy of being no one special." The boy didn't understand, but he remembered the man's calm. Years later, he too would walk into the mountains, not to escape, but to discover. Moral of the story: we spend much of life building an identity, Titles, roles, names others recognize. But peace begins when we stop trying to be someone in the eyes of the world. In letting go of who we think we are, we touch the freedom of simply being. Walking without arriving. A young monk once asked his teacher, "When will I finally reach enlightenment?" He had been studying for years, chanting, meditating, reading sacred texts, and still he felt no closer to the peace he longed for. His mind was restless, always imagining a better future, a clearer understanding, a final moment where everything would suddenly make sense. The teacher did not answer with words. Instead, he invited the monk to walk with him along the winding mountain path behind the temple. They walked in silence. The trail curved through tall grasses, under swaying trees, beside streams that whispered with each step. Time passed. The monk kept waiting for the teacher to stop, to point at something, to reveal the meaning. But they kept walking. Eventually, the monk asked, "Master, where are we going?" The teacher smiled softly. "We're already there." The monk looked around. Nothing had changed. Just the trail, the trees, the sound of their sandals brushing the earth. "But we didn't arrive anywhere," he said. The teacher nodded. "Exactly." The monk grew quiet. Something in the teacher's words unsettled him and soothed him at the same time. He realized he had spent so much of his life chasing after an idea. Enlightenment as a place, as a destination, as a reward. He had never truly just walked. As they continued, the monk began to notice the rhythm of his steps, the way the breeze touched his face, the small insects flying near the grass. He wasn't trying to get somewhere anymore. He was simply here. And for the first time, that was enough. Later, when they returned to the temple, the monk sat alone in the garden, watching a single leaf fall slowly to the ground. He felt no rush, no goal, just stillness in motion. Moral of the story: peace is not a place we arrive at. It is found in each step we take with presence. When we stop rushing towards some future moment, we realize that everything we seek is already here. The journey itself is the destination. The breath that carries no weight. In a quiet temple nestled beside a wide, flowing river, a young monk struggled with the weight of his thoughts. He carried guilt from his past, fears of his future, and doubts about whether he was worthy of the path he had chosen. Though his robes were light, his heart was heavy. Each morning during meditation, he would close his eyes and focus on his breath as the master had taught him. But instead of finding peace, he found pressure. His chest felt tight. His thoughts swirled like dust in a storm. He tried harder, counting each inhale, each exhale, hoping that if he could do it perfectly, the pain would leave. One morning, the master sat beside him. Without speaking, he placed a single feather in the monk's hand. "Breathe on it," he said. The monk exhaled gently, and the feather floated upward, caught in the wind, light and free. "Now," the master said, "breathe as if your thoughts are this feather. Not something to push, not something to hold, just something to let rise and fall." The monk closed his eyes again, this time not trying to control his breath, not trying to make it perfect. He simply breathed, softly, naturally. And something shifted. With each breath, he felt space opening within him, not because the thoughts were gone, but because he no longer fought them. His breath became a friend, not a task. It came and went, like waves on the river, asking for nothing, needing nothing. He opened his eyes and whispered, "It's so light." The master nodded. Because peace doesn't come from holding the breath, it comes from trusting it. The breath knows the way. Your only task is to follow without burden. From that day on, the monk stopped trying to breathe perfectly. He breathed to remember that he was alive, that he didn't need to carry everything, that the present moment was enough. Moral of the story: peace lives in the breath we do not force. When we stop trying to control each moment and simply allow it to rise and fall, we discover that our breath, like our life, carries no weight unless we cling to it. Let go, and the air itself becomes a path to freedom. A smile left in the sand, along a quiet shore where the sea whispered to the earth and the wind carried no weight, a wandering monk walked barefoot each morning. He never stayed in one place long, never carried much, just a small bag, a bowl, and a calm heart. The villagers rarely spoke to him, but they noticed something unusual. Wherever he went, he smiled. Not a loud or boastful smile, just a gentle one. One that didn't ask for attention, one that seemed to rise from deep inside him, untouched by the weather, the world, or time. One morning, a boy followed the monk from a distance. He watched him walk to the edge of the beach, sit quietly, and then draw something in the sand with his finger. By the time the boy reached him, the monk was standing and dusting off his robes. The boy looked down. It was a smile, just a simple curved line drawn in the sand. "Why do you do this?" the boy asked. The monk turned, his eyes soft and kind. "Because joy must be shared, even if only for a moment." "But the tide will come," the boy said. "It will wash it away." The monk nodded. "Yes, and that is why it's beautiful." The boy frowned. "I don't understand." The monk knelt beside him and said quietly, "Everything passes. The joy, the pain, the people we love, the things we build. But if we give something kind to the world, even for a moment, it lives. Maybe not forever in the sand, but in the heart of someone who sees it." The monk walked on, his footprints fading behind him. The boy stayed, watching the waves slowly creep in. Moments later, the smile was gone, washed away like it had never been there. But the boy still saw it in his mind. He felt something warm he couldn't explain. The next day, a new smile appeared in the sand, drawn by a small hand. Moral of the story: what we offer to the world, even briefly, matters. A smile left in the sand may vanish with the tide, but its warmth can last forever in another's heart. Kindness doesn't need to last forever. It only needs to be real, and it will echo quietly beyond its moment. The river that forgot its source. Once, in a lush and distant land, there flowed a wide river, strong, swift, and full of life. It carved through valleys, fed forests, gave water to villages, and carried boats filled with travelers and goods. The river was proud of all it offered, all it moved, all it touched. Over time, the river began to believe that its power came only from its speed, from how far it could reach, from how much it could do. It rushed forward with purpose, always chasing the next bend, the next destination. The river stopped looking back. It forgot the quiet spring high in the mountains from which it had once emerged. small, still, and pure. Seasons passed. The river grew restless. Its waters darkened. Storms stirred its surface. Villages once nourished by its banks now built walls to contain it. The river, once a gift, became a burden. Too fast, too wild, too swollen with pride. One day, a drought came. The sky turned dry, and the river's body shrank. Its roar softened into a whisper. The boats stopped. The people left. For the first time in ages, the river was still. And in that stillness, something ancient stirred inside. The river, now quiet, began to remember. Not the noise, not the praise, but the beginning. A small spring in the mountains, a single drop of water emerging from stone, a place of silence where it had first learned to flow without rushing. The river wept, though no one saw. Not from sorrow, but from the relief of remembering. In its humility, it found peace. Its strength had never come from how far it reached, but from the stillness of where it began. A monk passing nearby stood on the river's edge, eyes closed. He whispered, "We forget ourselves when we chase the world, but in the pause, we return." The river didn't answer. It simply flowed, calmer, clearer, and more alive than before. Moral of the story: in chasing recognition and movement, we often forget where we come from. True strength doesn't lie in how far we go, but in remembering the still, quiet source within us. When we return to that place, we begin to flow again, not with effort, but with grace. Threads of an unwoven robe. In a hillside temple known for its silence, there lived a monk who never wore a finished robe. Instead, he walked the temple grounds with threads draped over his shoulders, red, gold, and white strands hanging loose, never sewn. Visitors often stared, puzzled by his appearance, wondering if he was poor or perhaps forgetful. But the monks never questioned it. They knew there was a story behind every thread. One curious traveler finally asked the old monk, "Why do you not complete your robe? Surely it would be more proper, more respectable if it were finished." The monk smiled, his eyes creased with kindness. "Many years ago," he said, "I was given fine cloth to stitch my robe. I began to sew it, stitch by stitch, believing that when it was complete, I would finally be worthy. I thought a finished robe would mean a finished self. But as I worked, I realized something," he continued. "Each time I made progress, I expected more of myself. I was never satisfied. I told myself I would be content when the robe was done. But peace never came. So I stopped sewing." The traveler was silent, unsure of what to say. The monk looked down at the flowing threads. "These threads remind me that I am not here to be finished. I am here to be present, to live each moment without needing it to be perfect or complete or even understood." The wind stirred, and the threads danced gently against his skin. "I walk like this," the monk said, "to remind myself that life is not something we complete. It is something we experience. The need to be whole, to be polished, to be impressive, it only leads to suffering. These threads, they are freedom." The traveler bowed low. He had come seeking wisdom wrapped in answers, but had found something far more valuable: the peace that comes from not needing to arrive. Moral of the story: wholeness is not found in perfection. Like threads of an unwoven robe, life is most beautiful when we stop trying to complete it and instead learn to embrace it as it is, unfinished, flowing, and enough. The Master who owned nothing. High atop a quiet hill stood a tiny hut no larger than a single room. Inside lived a Zen master known across the land, not for his teachings alone, but for how little he possessed. No fine robes, no gold, not even a real bed, just a thin mat, a wooden bowl, and a candle that had burned low for years. Travelers came from far places to learn from him, expecting deep scriptures or complex practices, but when they arrived, they were surprised. The Master welcomed them with kindness, but offered no lectures, no rituals, only silence, tea, and a space to sit. One young visitor, troubled by loss and fear, finally asked, "Master, you live with nothing. How are you so full of peace?" The Master smiled and gestured to the open window, where sunlight poured in and the wind passed freely through the room. If this room were filled with things, could the light come in? The young man paused, confused. The Master continued, "People carry too much: possessions, memories, expectations, regrets. They cling to what has passed or what might be, but the more you carry, the less room there is for peace to enter." He picked up his empty bowl. "This bowl feeds me not because it is full, but because it is empty, ready to receive." That night, the young man sat outside the hut, listening to the wind through the trees. He thought of everything he had clung to, his titles, his failures, his pride. He felt their weight, and for the first time, he felt willing to let them go. In the quiet, something shifted, not all at once, not loudly, but like fog lifting slowly off a mountain. He stayed at the hut for several days, never asking for more teachings. He swept the floor, fetched water, and learned by watching a man who lived freely because he owned nothing and needed nothing to be whole. Moral of the story: true freedom is not found in gaining more, but in needing less. When we empty ourselves of attachment, we become like an open bowl, ready to receive peace, light, and all that truly nourishes the soul. The wind asked nothing. A wandering monk once made his home beneath an old fig tree on the edge of a vast meadow. Each morning he sat in meditation, wrapped in stillness, as the wind moved through the tall grass and over his skin. Travelers passed by often, asking for teachings, advice, or blessings. Some stayed, some left disappointed when the monk offered them only silence or a gentle smile. One day, a troubled man arrived, worn and angry. He sat harshly in front of the monk and demanded, "What do I have to do to find peace? I've followed rules, prayed, worked hard, but I'm still filled with pain. What more do I need to give? What else do you want from me?" The monk opened his eyes slowly and gestured to the breeze flowing between them. "Do you feel the wind?" The man looked around, confused. "Of course." "Did it ask anything from you?" the monk said. The man paused. "No." "Did it demand you be better or more worthy before it touched your skin?" The man slowly shook his head. The monk's voice was soft, like the rustle of leaves. "Peace is like the wind. It asks nothing. It does not need you to earn it. It simply flows. But if you chase it or try to hold it still, It slips through your hands. The man stared at the grass bending gently in the breeze. He realized how long he had been striving, trying to earn calm like a prize, trying to prove he deserved rest, trying to hold his pain with clenched fists. But the wind didn't ask for effort. It just came when he was still enough to feel it. A tear slipped down his cheek. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to fight or fix himself. He simply breathed. The wind passed through him again, and this time he felt it fully. Moral of the story: peace cannot be earned, it can only be received. Like the wind, it arrives when we stop striving and begin to listen. The heart opens not through force, but through softness. When we ask nothing, everything begins to arrive. Beyond the temple bell. Each morning at sunrise, the great bronze bell of the temple was struck, its deep tone rolling across the valley like a slow breath. It was a sound all the villagers knew well, a signal to begin the day, to pray, to pause. For some, it brought comfort. For others, a feeling they could not explain. One young monk, new to the temple, became fascinated by the bell. He loved its sound, the way it seemed to silence every thought the moment it rang. He would sit beneath it, waiting for the strike, believing that this single note held the secret to enlightenment. He asked the elder, "Master, is the sound of the bell what brings peace to the heart?" The master looked at him gently. "The sound helps you remember, but it is not the sound that frees you. It is what remains when the sound fades." The young monk didn't understand. That night, he stayed behind after evening meditation. When the temple was quiet and the bell unstruck, he sat beneath it and waited. There was no sound, only darkness, stillness. His mind, usually full of questions and noise, began to search, listening for something. But all he heard was silence. And then he noticed something strange. In that silence, his breath became clearer. His thoughts slowed. There was nothing to chase, nothing to hold. He was simply there. The next morning, when the bell rang again, it was no longer the sound he listened to, but the moment just after, the still air, the space left behind. He began to understand. He returned to the master and said quietly, "The bell calls me to silence, but it is the silence that holds the truth." The master nodded. The bell is just a finger pointing. The sound disappears. But what it leaves, if you're listening, that's where awakening begins. From then on, the young monk listened less for the bell and more for what came after. Not noise, not silence, but presence. Moral of the story: external sounds may call our attention, but it is the quiet that follows where true peace lives. When we listen beyond the noise, beyond even silence, we begin to hear the stillness within, the soundless bell of the awakened heart. The monk who died laughing. In a small mountain village, there lived an old monk whose joy was known far and wide. He laughed easily, at birds stealing rice, at the sound of thunder, even when he stumbled on stones. Some thought he was foolish, others thought he was wise. But none could deny the lightness that followed him wherever he went. He had a simple way of living. He grew vegetables, swept the temple floor, and told quiet jokes to the young novices. He never feared trouble, and he never clung to praise. People would ask him, "Why are you always laughing?" And he would reply, "Because everything is always changing. Why not laugh while we can?" One morning, the old monk did not rise from his bed. The novices gathered, quiet and concerned. The air felt different. They found him lying peacefully, his hands folded, his face turned to the window where sunlight poured in. On his lips was a smile, soft, playful, content. In his final days, he had said, "When I die, do not mourn, do not chant for hours. Just let me go like a leaf on the river, smiling." And he did. Word spread through the village, and people came with tears and flowers. But when they saw the joy still on his face, something softened in them. They wept, yes, but they also laughed. Not out of disrespect, but because they could feel him still. His freedom, his spirit, his reminder that even death is not so heavy when we carry it with light. A young monk asked the abbot, "Why did he smile like that, even as he passed?" The abbot placed a hand on the novice's shoulder and said, "Because he lived every day as if it were his last, and met every moment with acceptance. There was nothing left to fear. He didn't wait for joy. He chose it, even at the end." Later that night, the novices placed a single candle at his bedside. The flame flickered gently, and one of them whispered, "He's still laughing, isn't he?" And somehow, in the silence, they all felt it too. Moral of the story: freedom comes not from avoiding death, but from embracing life with an open heart. When we stop fearing the end and start living with joy now, even our final breath can be filled with peace. And yes, even laughter. Leaves never argue. In the gentle hills surrounding an old temple, autumn would come like a whispered farewell. The trees would turn golden and red, their leaves letting go one by one, floating softly to the earth. A young monk, full of frustration, often wandered those hills, troubled by his own thoughts. He struggled with the actions of others, words that hurt him, people who misunderstood him, monks who did not live as purely as he hoped. His mind was a constant argument. One day, he sat beneath a large maple tree, clenching a fallen leaf in his hand. His teacher approached quietly and joined him in silence. After a few moments, the teacher asked, "Why do you look so heavy today?" The monk shook his head. "I am trying to let things go, but people are unfair. They speak without care. They act with ego. It makes me angry. It makes me want to argue." The teacher gently picked up a leaf from the ground and held it in his palm. "Do you see this leaf?" he said. "It once clung tightly to the tree, green and full of life. But when it was time, it let go, without complaint, without fear. And now it rests. It doesn't ask why it was dropped. It doesn't fight the wind. It simply falls." The monk looked at the leaf in his own hand, curled at the edges, dry yet beautiful. It had no anger in it, no resistance, just quiet acceptance. The teacher continued, "Leaves never argue. They let go when it is time. They do not blame the tree or the wind or the season. They teach us that peace does not come from being right, but from releasing the need to fight." Tears welled up in the monk's eyes. All the energy he had spent trying to be understood, trying to correct others, trying to win silent battles in his head, it had only left him tired. He opened his hand and let the leaf drift to the ground. For the first time in a long while, he felt light. Moral of the story: peace doesn't come from proving yourself. Like leaves falling from a tree, true freedom comes when we let go of blame, of control, of needing to be right. In surrender, the heart becomes quiet and the mind begins to rest, a house made of moments. In the hills above a quiet river, a gentle monk lived in a small hut built from wood, stone, and love. It was nothing grand, just a single room with a mat for sleeping, a kettle for tea, and windows that opened to the sound of birds. Yet all who visited said it felt like a palace, not because of what was inside, but because of how they felt when they were there. One day, a weary traveler arrived at the hut. His face was tired, his heart even more so. "I've spent my life building," he told the monk. "A big house, a business, a name. But I don't feel at home in any of it. Everything I've built feels like it's always slipping away." The monk invited him in and poured tea. They sat in silence as steam rose between them, soft and calm. Then the monk said, "This house was not built with bricks or plans. It was built with moments, each one fully lived. I sweep the floor with care, and that becomes a wall. I boil water in silence, and that becomes a roof. I breathe in the morning light, and that becomes a door." The traveler looked around. The room was plain, yet it felt sacred, like the air itself was holding something rare. "I don't understand," he said. "How can you live with so little and feel so full?" The monk smiled. "Because I do not live in a structure. I live in presence. My house may crumble one day, but these moments, this breath, this warmth between us, they are where I truly live." The traveler sat quietly, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. He realized he had spent years racing from one moment to the next, always chasing, never arriving. But in this tiny hut, with no walls except stillness, he felt more at home than he ever had. He stayed until the sun began to set, and as he walked away, he did not miss his mansion. He only remembered the tea, the silence, and the way the wind moved through the open window. Moral of the story: home is not a place, it is presence. When we build our lives from awareness and gratitude, each moment becomes a shelter. In simplicity, in stillness, we find that the truest home is already within us. Tea for the passing stranger. In a small mountain village, far from any road or map, there lived an elderly monk, known not for his words, but for his tea. Each day, he would prepare a single pot and sit outside his cottage, watching the sun move through the trees. He never called out, never invited anyone in, but whenever someone passed by, he would pour a cup and offer it with both hands, as if handing over a sacred gift. One cold afternoon, a weary traveler climbed the narrow path leading past the monk's home. His face was tight with exhaustion. His eyes held years of wandering, of seeking answers from books, temples, and distant teachers. When he saw the monk sitting in silence, he stopped, unsure whether to speak. The monk looked up, smiled gently, and poured a second cup of tea without a word. The traveler hesitated. "I have no offering," he said. "No gold, no wisdom, no stories worth sharing." The monk said nothing, only held out the cup. Reluctantly, the traveler accepted it and sat down. The tea was warm and simple. No spices, no sweetness, just water, leaves, and care. Minutes passed. The steam rose and disappeared into the air. The traveler, expecting teachings or questions, found only silence between them. But something in that silence soothed him more than any sermon he had heard. He took another sip and whispered, "Why are you so kind to strangers?" The monk smiled, eyes soft like the fading sun. "Because no one remains a stranger after tea." The traveler looked down at his cup, suddenly aware of how long he had gone without being seen, without being welcomed, without judgment, without being asked to be anything more than what he already was. His chest tightened, not with sadness, but with the strange relief of being received without needing to earn it. The tea was finished. The monk said nothing more. The traveler stood, bowed deeply, and walked on, not changed by great words, but by quiet warmth. Moral of the story: kindness needs no reason, no reward, and no perfect moment. A simple act, like tea for a passing stranger, can soften the hardest hearts. Often, what we need most is not answers, but to feel gently welcomed, just as we are. The mirror without reflection. Deep in the forest, in a quiet temple rarely visited, there was said to be a mirror unlike any other. It was kept not in the main hall, but in a small hidden room where only a few were ever allowed to enter. This mirror, the monk said, did not reflect faces, bodies, or forms. When one looked into it, there was nothing to see, only emptiness. One day, a proud young man, full of ideas and ambition, arrived at the temple. He had heard of the mirror and demanded to see it. "I want to know who I really am," he said. "Let the mirror show me." The head monk studied him calmly. "This mirror will not show what you expect. It does not reflect what is on the surface. It reveals only what is true beneath." The man smirked. "All the better. I seek truth." He was led into the small room. The mirror stood on a wooden frame, plain and dusty. He stepped before it and looked, but saw nothing. No face, no light, no image. Just a deep, quiet stillness that stared back at him. At first, he laughed. "It's broken." But as the seconds passed, something in the silence began to press against him. With no reflection, there was nowhere to hide. His smile faded. His thoughts grew loud. He began to feel everything he usually buried: his fear of failure, his need for approval, his doubt, his loneliness. He looked away. The monk, still standing behind him, said gently, "You asked to see who you really are, and what you saw was not nothing. It was what remains when ego, appearance, and stories fall away." The man sat down, shaken. For the first time, he felt small, quiet, and strangely free. He realized he had always defined himself by what others saw: his name, his role, his strength. But the mirror had shown him the space beneath all of that, a place untouched, vast, and real. He left the temple without words, not because he was empty, but because something inside had just begun. Moral of the story: the truest self cannot be seen in surface reflections. When we let go of identity and ego, what remains is not nothing, but the quiet space of truth. In emptiness, we meet the self beyond all stories. A question without words. At a peaceful temple high above the rice fields, there lived a young monk who could not speak. Since childhood, he had known only silence, yet his eyes were bright and his spirit calm. The other monks were kind to him, but some believed he could never truly understand the teachings without words. One day, a traveling scholar arrived, proud, wise, and full of questions. He had studied sutras across many lands, debated with masters, and filled countless scrolls with thoughts. He asked to meet the abbot, hoping to share ideas and test the depth of the temple's wisdom. The abbot welcomed him and offered tea. As they sat in the courtyard, the silent monk arrived to serve them. The scholar watched him with a hint of amusement. "Can one who cannot speak truly understand the Dharma?" he asked, half joking. The abbot said nothing. He simply nodded at the silent monk. The monk turned, walked to the garden, and returned with a small, unopened lotus bud in his hand. He held it out to the scholar and waited. The scholar frowned. "What does this mean?" Still, the monk did not speak. He sat down, placed the bud gently on the table, and looked up at the sky. The scholar followed his gaze and saw the sun beginning to warm the morning air. Minutes passed. The bud slowly began to open. No words, no explanation, just silence, sunlight, and the quiet unfolding of life. The scholar stared, humbled. He suddenly felt the weight of his questions dissolve, not because they were answered, but because they no longer needed to be. In that moment, he realized that some truths do not live in books or arguments. They live in presence, in patience, in what is felt, not said. He bowed deeply to the silent monk, his heart full, not of knowledge, but of understanding. Moral of the story: not all questions need words, and not all answers come from speech. Sometimes the deepest wisdom is shared in silence. When we stop demanding explanations and simply witness what is, we find truth unfolding quietly, like a flower warmed by the morning sun. The sutra with no pages. In a quiet monastery, where the mist moved like breath through the morning trees, a young monk was tasked with copying sacred sutras by hand. Day after day, he sat in silence, brush in hand, ink flowing onto parchment, forming the words of the Buddha, each stroke careful, reverent, steady. But one morning he entered the scriptorium to find a blank scroll on the table. No text, no title, no instructions. Just a pure sheet of rice paper and a note from the head monk that read, "Copy this sutra with your heart." The young monk was confused. "There are no words," he whispered. "What am I meant to write?" He brought the scroll to the abbot and asked, "Master, how do I copy a sutra that contains nothing?" The old monk smiled softly. "Not all teachings are written with ink. Some are written in silence. Some are not meant to be read, but felt." The young monk returned to the scroll, uncertain. He sat. He waited. For hours, he stared at the blankness, trying to think of something meaningful. But each time he reached for the brush, his thoughts got louder. Doubt, pressure, the fear of getting it wrong. Eventually, he set the brush down, closed his eyes, breathed. And in that breath, something changed. He let go of needing to fill the page. He let go of needing to understand. He just sat, with the paper, with his breath, with the quiet. The next day, he brought the untouched scroll back to the abbot and bowed low. "I wrote nothing," he said, "but I feel like I understood everything. The abbot unrolled the scroll and smiled. You have copied it perfectly. The monks later placed the scroll in the temple's center, not to be read, but to be seen. Visitors often stood before it, confused at first. But those who stayed long enough would begin to feel it, the peace between thoughts, the fullness in emptiness. Moral of the story: not all wisdom speaks in words. Some truths are too deep for ink. When we quiet the need to explain, we begin to understand. In the silence of a page unwritten, the heart hears what the mind cannot. The beggar who taught the king. In a wealthy kingdom filled with gold, silk, and power, there was a king known for his endless hunger, for land, for praise, for more. Though he had everything a man could desire, sleep never came easily, and peace always slipped through his fingers. One morning, while riding through the village, the king saw a beggar sitting beneath a tree. His robe was torn, his bowl nearly empty, but his face held a calmness the king had never known. The beggar sat with his back against the trunk, sipping tea from a cracked cup, smiling softly at nothing in particular. The king, puzzled and slightly irritated, rode closer. "You have nothing," he said. "No palace, no gold, no servants, and yet you smile as though you've won the world." The beggar bowed gently. "I smile," he said, "because I've stopped trying to win it." The king frowned. "But don't you want more? A warm bed? A better life?" The beggar looked up into the branches above them. "Once I did," he said. "I chased after comfort, recognition, safety, but it never ended. When I had little, I wanted more. When I had more, I feared losing it." He held up his empty bowl. "Then one day, I stopped running. I sat still. I breathed, and I found that this," he gestured to the shade, the breeze, the tea, "was enough." The king was silent. He felt something strange in his chest, like the quiet ache of truth. He had built walls of gold, filled rooms with luxury, yet never felt the stillness this beggar had found beneath a tree. That evening, the king returned to the palace, but the beggar's words followed him. He dismissed his servants, removed his crown, and sat alone. No music, no feast, just breath, silence, and the weight of a world he no longer needed to carry. For the first time in years, he slept deeply. Moral of the story: true wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we no longer need. Peace comes when we stop chasing more and begin to see that enough has been with us all along, waiting quietly beneath the noise. 1,000 empty bowls. In the heart of a vast valley stood a monastery known for its simplicity. The monks who lived there followed the most humble of practices, eating only what was offered, sleeping on straw mats, and owning nothing but a single wooden bowl. One day, a wealthy man arrived at the gates, his robe stitched with gold and his hands heavy with rings. He had traveled far, searching for the meaning of peace. He believed that in giving he might find freedom. So he offered the monks a grand gift: 1,000 bowls carved from jade, ivory, and silver. The abbot welcomed him with a warm bow and received the gift with gratitude. The bowls were placed in a long line across the monastery floor, shining in the sunlight. The wealthy man stood proudly, waiting for some ceremony or blessing in return. But the monks said nothing. They bowed and returned to their simple duties. Later that evening, the man approached the abbot. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. "I gave you all of this. Shouldn't I feel something more?" The abbot looked at him gently. "Your offering is generous, but peace does not come from the beauty of a bowl. It comes from how it is held." He led the man to the hall, where the bowls now sat in silence. "Do you see? All these bowls, and still they are empty." The man grew quiet. "You have given much," the abbot continued, "but your heart is still hungry. No bowl, no matter how fine, can fill that emptiness. Peace is not in giving things. It is in giving yourself, fully, quietly, without needing to be seen." The man lowered his gaze. For years, he had tried to earn peace with riches, with praise, with offerings that glittered. But here, among empty bowls and quiet monks, he saw that what he had never offered was his full presence. He stayed the night in silence, and in the morning he offered nothing, only his hands, his breath, his attention. And for the first time in years, he felt full. Moral of the story: true peace is not found in what we give, but in how we give. Even 1,000 bowls mean nothing if they are filled with emptiness. But one quiet offering of the heart can hold all the meaning in the world. The rain that spoke in silence. In a small village wrapped in mist and mountains, there lived a monk who never gave sermons, never lectured, and never wrote a single word. Yet those who spent even a day near him often left with tears in their eyes and peace in their hearts. When asked how he taught, he would simply smile and point to the sky. One autumn, a young woman burdened by sorrow came to the temple. She had lost much: her father, her home, and her sense of hope. "Please," she said, kneeling before the silent monk, "I don't need words. I just need to feel something again. Anything, even grief." The monk said nothing. He rose slowly and motioned for her to follow. They walked in silence through the forest until they reached a clearing. The sky was grey, heavy with unshed rain. The air smelled of earth and leaves. The monk sat cross-legged on the grass and closed his eyes. She sat beside him, unsure of what to do. Then the first drop fell, soft, gentle, pure, and then another and another. Soon the rain began to fall steadily, not harshly, but like a lullaby. It touched their robes, their faces, their hands, and still neither of them moved. The young woman let it fall on her without resistance. The sky cried the tears she could not. Something shifted inside her, not a sudden answer, not a loud awakening, but a quiet loosening. The tight knot in her chest began to soften. The ache remained, but it no longer strangled her. She felt seen, not by a person, but by the world itself, by the rain that said nothing, yet spoke directly to the grief in her bones. They stayed there for hours, soaked and silent. The monk never spoke because he didn't need to. As they walked back, she looked at him with trembling gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I finally heard something." He only nodded and pointed again to the sky. Moral of the story: not all healing comes through words. Sometimes the world speaks in silence, in rain, in stillness, in presence. When we stop searching for answers and simply allow ourselves to feel, peace begins to speak in its own gentle voice. The candle that lit itself. In a small, wind-worn temple perched at the edge of a cliff, there was a legend about a candle that could light itself. The monks spoke of it not as magic, but as a teaching, shared only with those truly ready to understand. A young monk, eager and full of questions, had heard the story as a child. Now grown, he approached the elder one quiet evening and asked, "Master, is it true? Can a candle light without a flame?" The master said nothing. Instead, he walked to the old altar where a single unlit candle stood. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside it. They waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. The room grew darker as the sun slipped below the mountains. Still, the candle remained cold and untouched. The young monk shifted, frustrated. "Nothing is happening," he whispered. The master finally spoke. "Look again, not with impatience, but with presence." The young monk sighed, but this time he softened. He let his breath slow. He watched not for fire, but for stillness. And in the quiet, he began to feel something, not on the wick, but within himself. He saw how his mind had burned with wanting, how his thoughts were sparks flying in every direction, always needing answers, results, proof. But now, in the deep silence, something else arose, an inner warmth, not from the candle, from within. The master said gently, "The candle that lights itself is not outside you. It is your own heart. When you become still enough, when you stop looking for something to strike you awake, the light rises from inside." The young monk felt tears form, not from sadness, but from recognition. He had spent so long waiting for something outside him to begin his awakening, but the fire was already there, quiet, waiting for him to see it. The candle on the altar remained unlit, and yet, in the young monk's eyes, something had clearly begun to glow. Moral of the story: awakening does not come from the outside. No spark, no teacher, no miracle can give us what we do not first allow to rise within. Like a candle that lights itself, the light of truth begins when we turn inward and trust the flame already waiting there. A journey with no luggage. A young monk once set out to find truth. He packed everything he thought he would need: books of teachings, extra robes, dried food, prayer beads, a journal, and a blanket from his mother. His bag was heavy, but he felt proud. "I am prepared," he told himself. "I will not be caught off guard." As he walked through villages and forests, mountains and valleys, the weight on his back grew. Each step became harder, each breath shorter. He stopped often, adjusting his load, repacking, resting. And though his path was full of beauty, flowers blooming, rivers humming, people smiling, he saw little of it. His mind was too focused on what he carried. One afternoon, as he struggled up a steep trail, he met an old monk coming down the same path. The old man had no bag, no shoes, no map, just a walking stick and a soft, open face. The young monk paused. "Where is your luggage?" he asked, panting. "Aren't you afraid to travel without anything?" The old monk chuckled quietly. "I had luggage once. Then I realized most of it was fear, expectation, and memory, disguised as need." The young monk frowned. "But how do you live without your things?" The old monk smiled. "I carry what cannot be taken from me: stillness, breath, kindness, and the sky." He looked at the young monk's swollen shoulders and said, "Sometimes we think we need more to feel safe, but truth is light. It cannot be found beneath weight." That night, the young monk made camp by a quiet stream. He opened his bag and looked at each item. He thought of why he brought it: guilt, pride, worry, habit. One by one, he placed many of them in a pile by the fire. As he let them go, his heart felt lighter. He didn't throw away everything, only what no longer served the journey. And when he walked the next day, he moved differently, slower, lighter. He began to notice the wind again, the sound of birds, his own breath. The road hadn't changed, but he had. Moral of the story: we carry so much that we don't need: fears, regrets, expectations. When we lighten the load, we begin to truly walk. The path to peace asks not for more, but for less. And often, the less we carry, the more we see. The well that waited. At the edge of a dry, cracked field stood an old stone well. Long ago, it had been the center of the village, where children laughed, elders gathered, and cool water brought life to tired hands. But over the years, the rains stopped. The villagers moved on. The well was left behind, silent and unused. Still, it remained, not collapsed, not bitter, just waiting. One summer, a traveling monk passed through the land. He had walked far under the harsh sun, and his throat was dry. Spotting the old well, he approached with little hope. When he looked down, all he saw was darkness. No water, no reflection. Yet, instead of turning away, he sat beside it. He placed his hands on the warm stones and whispered, "Even when the world forgets us, we are still here." Then he closed his eyes and listened, not for sound, but for stillness. As the sun dipped behind the hills, a faint breeze stirred the air. The monk stood, tied a rope to the old bucket, and slowly lowered it down. He did not expect anything. He simply trusted the depth. Moments later, the bucket hit something soft and cool. Water. He pulled it up slowly, steadily. Clear, fresh water shimmered in the fading light. The monk smiled and drank deeply. The well, after all those silent years, had not gone dry. It had simply waited, deep beneath the noise and forgetting, for someone to be still enough to find it. That night, the monk slept beside the well under the stars. In the morning, he left a sign carved into stone: "Still waters remain, even in silence." Years later, as the rains returned and new villagers came, the well gave again. Patient, generous, unchanged. It had never lost its gift. It had only waited to be seen again. Moral of the story: what is true and deep within us never disappears. It only waits. Like a forgotten well, our wisdom, peace, and strength may be hidden beneath silence and time. But with patience and trust, they will rise again. Sometimes, the most important things are simply waiting to be remembered. 10,000 things. One silence. In a valley rich with life, buzzing with birds, rippling streams, laughing children, ringing temple bells, a young monk struggled to find peace. He had read that silence was the doorway to truth, yet everywhere he turned, there was sound, too much life, too much movement. "Where is the silence I've been promised?" he asked his teacher one morning. "The world is filled with noise. I can't find stillness anywhere." The teacher said nothing, only led the monk into the heart of the village. They walked past merchants calling out prices, dogs barking, pots clanging. Then to the fields, where farmers shouted from across rows of golden rice. Then to the river, where children splashed and laughed and played. Finally, they sat beside a tree that overlooked it all. "Now," the teacher said, "listen." The monk frowned. "To what?" "To everything." So he did. He listened. First to the wind, then to the laughter, then to the fluttering of birds, the buzzing of insects, even the breath in his own chest. Then something strange happened. The more he listened without judgment, the more he began to hear not the noise, but the space between the sounds. A soft hum beneath it all, a quiet thread running through the clamor. It was not the absence of sound, but a silence that held everything within it. The monk's eyes widened. The silence hadn't been missing. It had always been there. Not outside, but beneath. Not separate from the world, but woven through it. His teacher smiled. "You were looking for silence as a place, but it is not a place. It is your presence. 10,000 things may call your name, but silence is the one who listens." The monk nodded, tears catching at the corners of his eyes. He had been fighting the world, trying to quiet life instead of joining it with an open heart. He walked back to the temple without seeking escape. The wind, the voices, the birds, all sang within the silence now, and his soul, for the first time, sang with them. Moral of the story: silence is not the absence of sound, it is the stillness beneath it. When we stop resisting the world and start listening deeply, we discover that even among 10,000 things, peace is always present, waiting quietly to be heard. The feather and the mountain. On the edge of a great mountain stood a small temple carved from stone high above the world. A young monk lived there, often gazing down at the villages below and up at the towering peak above. He admired the mountain's strength, how it never moved, never bent, never broke. "I want to be like that," he often thought, unshakable, powerful, untouched by fear. One morning, as he swept the steps, a soft breeze carried a white feather onto the stone path. It danced and spun, landing near his feet. He picked it up and held it gently. It was weightless, delicate, nothing like the mountain he looked up to each day. Later that evening, the head monk saw the feather resting beside the young monk's mat. "Why do you keep this?" he asked. The young monk shrugged. "I found it today. It's calming, but also weak. It could never survive a storm, not like the mountain." The elder smiled. "Are you so sure?" He sat beside the young monk and pointed out into the fading sky. "This mountain, strong as it seems, cannot move. It cannot bend. When storms come, it endures, but it also cracks, breaks, wears down slowly, year by year. Strength is not always stillness." He picked up the feather, watching it lift with the smallest breath of wind. This feather, it moves with the storm. It dances in it. It has no resistance, and so it does not break. Its power is in its softness. The young monk looked at the feather differently. All his life, he had tried to become solid, hard, unmovable. thinking that was the path to peace. But now he saw the quiet wisdom of the feather, light enough to trust the wind, soft enough to never shatter. That night, he placed the feather on his altar, not as a symbol of weakness, but of freedom. Moral of the story: true strength is not always found in being unmoved. Like the feather, sometimes the greatest peace lies in learning to flow, to bend, to trust. What is light may fall, but it also rises, and what yields does not break. A Zen master's forgetfulness. In a quiet temple near the edge of a pine forest, there lived a Zen master known for his deep wisdom and strange ways. He often forgot where he placed his bowl, left his sandals in the garden, or wandered into a room and forgot why he had entered. The younger monks whispered and laughed among themselves, wondering how such a respected teacher could be so forgetful. One morning, the master entered the meditation hall wearing mismatched robes. His left sandal was missing, and he carried a broom instead of his prayer beads. The students chuckled. One of them finally asked, "Master, how can you guide us when you forget so much? Even small things slip from your mind." The old master paused, then smiled. "I forget many things," he said, "but never who I am." The room fell silent. He sat down and continued softly, "When I forget my bowl, I eat with my hands. When I forget the path, I walk slowly and notice the flowers. When I forget the words, I listen more closely. And when I forget myself, I remember everything else." The students looked at one another, unsure. The master leaned forward, his voice warm. "The mind loves to hold on to names, dates, belongings, even pain. But sometimes forgetting is freedom. To forget where you're going allows you to be fully where you are. To forget what you lack allows you to feel what you already have. And to forget the self, even for a moment, allows the whole world to enter." That evening, as the wind rustled the pine trees and the stars rose quietly above the temple, the monks noticed something had changed in their hearts. They no longer saw the master's forgetfulness as weakness, but as a kind of purity, an unburdening. Days later, one young monk lost his robe and laughed instead of panicking. Another forgot his morning chant, but found comfort in the quiet instead. Slowly, they began to understand. To remember everything is a kind of weight, but to forget just enough is a kind of peace. Moral of the story: forgetfulness is not always a flaw. Sometimes, in letting go of what clutters the mind, plans, labels, even the self, we make room for something deeper. In forgetting, we may begin to truly remember what matters most: presence, peace, and the simplicity of being. The door that always opens. In a quiet temple surrounded by fields of golden grass, there was a wooden door at the back of the meditation hall. It looked like any other door, simple, weathered, with a handle worn smooth from years of use. Yet monks spoke of it with reverence, calling it the door that always opens. A new novice, young and full of doubt, heard the phrase and was puzzled. "What does that mean?" he asked an older monk. "All doors open. What makes this one so special?" The elder smiled gently. "That door is not like the ones you find in houses. It is a door of the heart." Still confused, the novice waited. One day, after failing in his studies, struggling with his thoughts, and feeling overcome by shame, He sat alone in the meditation hall. His mind was loud. He believed he wasn't good enough, too distracted, too emotional, too lost. He looked up and saw the door at the back. Without thinking, he walked to it and opened it. Outside, the wind was soft. The sky stretched wide. There was no instruction, no judgment, just space. Something loosened in him, not because of what he found on the other side, but because he had stepped through. Later that evening, he returned to the elder monk and asked, "Was that it? The door?" The elder nodded. "That door leads nowhere and everywhere. It is not about escape. It is a reminder. Whenever you feel trapped by fear, by pain, by your own mind, there is always a way through, even when you cannot see it." The novice lowered his head. "I thought I needed to be stronger before I could find peace." "No," the monk said softly. "You only need to be honest enough to knock and brave enough to open." Years later, that same novice, now a teacher, would often sit by the door after difficult days. He would open it quietly, breathe the evening air, and remember, peace is never locked. It only waits to be entered. Moral of the story: suffering makes us feel trapped, but the heart always holds a way through. Like a door that always opens, peace is never far. It simply waits for us to stop resisting, to step forward, and to let ourselves in. The laugh in the forest. In the middle of a deep, green forest, there was a path known only to a few monks. It was a place where the trees stood tall, like silent teachers, where light filtered through the leaves like gentle blessings. It was said that if one walked that path with a quiet mind, they might hear something unexpected, a laugh echoing softly through the trees. One day, a monk filled with sorrow decided to walk that path. He had lost someone dear to him, and though he chanted, meditated, and served, his heart remained heavy. Grief clung to him like fog. He wanted answers, he wanted release, but mostly he wanted to feel alive again. He walked slowly, feeling the moss under his feet and the wind on his face. Birds called to one another in the branches, and the world seemed to breathe with ease. Still, the sadness inside him weighed down every step. Then, as he turned a quiet bend in the trail, he heard it, a laugh. Light, sudden and free. It wasn't loud or forced. It was the kind of laugh that comes from the belly of stillness, from someone who has seen both joy and sorrow and made peace with both. Startled, the monk stopped and looked around, but no one was there. Only the trees, the wind, and his own racing heart. He waited. Nothing more came, just the memory of that laugh now settling into his chest. He sat down on a rock, closed his eyes, and let that sound echo inside him. For the first time in many weeks, he smiled, not because his pain was gone, but because he saw it differently now. The laugh didn't erase his grief, but it reminded him that even in the deepest forest, joy still walks quietly, hidden but never gone. He stayed there a while, not chasing answers, not forcing relief, just breathing, just remembering that sorrow and joy are not enemies. They are companions on the same path. As he rose to walk back, the forest seemed softer, and inside him, something had shifted. Moral of the story: joy is not the absence of sorrow. Like a laugh in the forest, it can rise even in the quietest, heaviest moments. When we stop searching and simply listen, we find that peace still echoes, softly, patiently, waiting to be heard. The whisper of the pebble. By a slow-moving river at the base of a quiet temple, an old monk would often sit alone, tossing pebbles into the water. The ripples they made were small, barely reaching the shore, but he watched each one as if it held a secret. A young monk once joined him, sitting in silence for a time before finally asking, "Why do you throw the same small pebble into the river each day?" The old monk smiled but didn't answer. He picked up another pebble, turned it in his palm, and let it fall gently into the water. The ripples widened, fading softly into stillness. The younger monk watched and said, "It doesn't change anything. The river keeps flowing. The pebble disappears." The elder looked at him and said quietly, "Ah, but it does change something. Not the river, but me." He continued, "This pebble is my thought, my anger, my sorrow. I do not throw it to make a mark. I throw it to let it go. And the whisper it makes as it falls reminds me that letting go does not need to be loud, it only needs to be honest." The young monk lowered his head. He had been carrying a weight, a conversation that had hurt him, a mistake he couldn't forgive in himself. It sat in his chest like a stone too sharp to swallow. The old monk held out a small pebble. "Try," he said. The young monk took it, breathed deeply, and whispered into the stone. Not a full sentence, not even a word, just a feeling. Then he dropped it into the river. The sound it made was almost nothing, but inside something softened. They sat together as the sun drifted lower. The river didn't remember the pebble, but the monk did, and in that forgetting, he felt release. Moral of the story: letting go doesn't require force or noise. Like a pebble falling into water, release can be quiet, simple, and full of meaning. Even the softest act, when done with truth, can free the heart and calm the mind. The fisherman who lost the sea. In a village where the ocean once kissed the edge of every home, there lived a fisherman who had spent his whole life sailing, casting nets, and listening to the waves. The sea was his rhythm, his comfort, his teacher. Every morning before dawn, he would rise, whisper a blessing to the tide, and disappear into the horizon. But over time, the shoreline changed. Storms came more often. The sea grew wild, then quiet, then distant. One day, the water stopped coming altogether. The bay dried slowly, leaving only cracked sand and memories behind. The village adapted, building roads where boats once floated, raising fields where salt once hung in the air. But the fisherman could not let go. Each morning he still walked to the shore, now dry and silent, dragging his boat across sand that no longer welcomed it. People watched with pity, sometimes with annoyance. "There is no sea," they said. "You must move on." But the fisherman only shook his head. "The sea cannot be lost," he would whisper. "It lives in me." Years passed. His hair turned white. His hands, once strong from rowing, trembled slightly. One day, a curious child approached him and asked, "Why do you still wait by the shore?" The fisherman smiled and replied, "I used to think I belonged to the sea, but now I understand. It was never outside me. The peace, the vastness, the rhythm, It's all here." He placed a hand over his heart. "Even when the water is gone." The child sat beside him. They closed their eyes together, and for a moment they both heard it, the sound of waves not in their ears, but in their breath. The fisherman no longer cast nets, but every morning he returned to the dry shore, not to mourn what was gone, but to remember what remained. His heart had become the ocean, and in its stillness he had finally come home. Moral of the story: what we think we've lost may not be gone. It may have moved within us. Like the sea inside the fisherman, peace is not always found in the outer world. Sometimes the deepest waters are the ones we carry quietly in our hearts. Footprints of the unseen walker. At dawn, before the temple bells rang and the world stirred from sleep, the sand path that circled the monastery would sometimes show footprints, delicate, bare, and always leading toward the woods, then back again. No one saw who made them. They appeared fresh, never rushed, never deep enough to disturb the earth, just enough to say, "Someone has passed through." The novices whispered about them. A spirit? A wandering sage? A trick of the wind? But the footprints kept appearing day after day, always in silence. One morning, a curious monk rose before the sun. Determined to solve the mystery, he sat beside the path, hidden in shadow, eyes fixed on the trail. Time passed. Then, just as the sky began to lighten, he saw a figure, an old monk walking slowly, softly, his gaze turned inward. He moved with no hurry, no sound. His breath matched the breeze. His steps left barely a trace, yet somehow they remained. He walked as if the earth itself recognized him, but asked for nothing in return. When the old monk returned, he noticed the watcher and paused. "You've seen me," he said kindly. "But tell me, what did you really see?" The young monk thought for a long moment. "I saw someone who wasn't trying to be seen." The elder smiled. "Exactly." He sat beside him on the path and looked at the prints fading behind them. Most people walk to be noticed. They leave behind noise, stories, ego. But when you walk without needing to be remembered, your presence still leaves something behind. Peace, perhaps. Stillness. A whisper of awareness. The young monk nodded, tears stinging his eyes. He had spent much of his life trying to be recognized, praised for wisdom, noticed for progress. But in this unseen walker, he saw a new kind of strength, one that moved quietly, gently, yet changed the ground it touched. From then on, he too walked differently, not to arrive, not to impress, but to become part of the silence. Moral of the story: the most powerful presence is not the loudest one. Like footprints that fade in the morning light, true peace leaves no mark of ego, only quiet traces of love, humility, and presence that others may follow. The flower that didn't bloom. In the courtyard of a quiet temple, nestled between smooth stones and moss-covered paths, there was a single flower that never opened. Year after year, as the other blossoms reached for the sun and painted the garden with color, this one small bud remained closed, tightly curled, untouched, waiting. The monks tended to it with the same care they gave every other plant. They watered it gently, gave it space, never forced its petals apart. Still, it stayed the same. Visitors would come in spring and pause to wonder. "Why hasn't it bloomed?" they asked. "Is it broken? Is it afraid?" But the monks only smiled. "It is not broken. It is simply not ready. And maybe it never will be. That is also okay." One novice, new to the temple and eager to learn, grew frustrated watching the stubborn flower. "What is the point of a flower that does not bloom?" he asked his teacher. "It gives no fragrance, no color, no beauty." The elder monk led him to the garden at dawn. The air was cool. The sky was soft with early light. They sat beside the bud, watching as bees danced among other blossoms as the wind stirred the trees. Then the elder said, "Must a flower prove itself to be worthy? Is its value only in what others see?" The novice was quiet. The elder continued, "This flower is not in a hurry. It is not chasing the sun. It is simply being. And in that, it is perfect, just as we are, not for what we achieve, but for how gently we live." Years passed. The flower never bloomed, and yet the monks called it the heart of the garden. Children sat beside it to meditate. Elders came to rest their tired eyes on its stillness. It became a reminder, not of failure, but of peace. Not everything must blossom loudly. Some things teach simply by being. Moral of the story: not all growth is visible. Like the flower that never blooms, we each have our own rhythm, our own quiet purpose. We are not here to prove, we are here to be. And in simply being, we may offer a kind of beauty the world deeply needs. A shadow with no past. At the edge of a wind-swept cliff stood a small temple, its stones worn smooth by time. One afternoon, a monk climbed to the highest point of the grounds and stood alone, watching his shadow stretch across the earth. The sun was behind him, but his thoughts were far behind that, stuck in memories he could not shake. He had once lived a different life before the robes and the vows, a life full of mistakes, harsh words, actions that brought pain to others and shame to himself. Though he had tried to change, tried to be good, the past followed him like a shadow he could not escape. An older monk joined him quietly and stood beside him, both of their shadows merging on the stone. "I want to let go," the younger monk whispered, "but no matter how far I walk, the past follows." The elder looked down at the dark shape stretching before them. "Your shadow isn't your past," he said. "It's your present. It moves with you. It has no memory. It carries no blame." The younger monk shook his head. "But it's always there." The elder knelt and placed his palm on the stone. "Yes, it's there, but it has no weight. You cannot hold it, cannot touch it, cannot be harmed by it. It exists only because of the light behind you." The words sank deep, like water into dry earth. The monk had always feared his past would define him, shape how others saw him, how he saw himself. But now he began to understand. The shadow was not something chasing him. It was simply part of walking in the light. He stood taller. The elder smiled. "You are not the man you were. You are the one who sees the shadow, not the one trapped inside it." As the sun began to dip and the shadows faded into dusk, the younger monk finally turned toward the light. Moral of the story: the past leaves echoes, but not chains. Like a shadow, it may follow us, but it cannot hold us. When we stop fearing what trails behind and start walking with awareness, we see the truth. The past does not define us. Our steps forward do. The dog who knew emptiness. In a quiet village where the temple bell echoed through the morning fog, there lived a stray dog who wandered the monastery grounds. He had no name, no collar, and no owner. Yet the monks never turned him away. He came and went as he pleased, silent, watchful, and still. The dog never barked, never begged, never chased. He sat beside the monks during meditation, lay under the trees during scripture readings, and followed behind the novices without a sound. Some found it odd how this dog seemed to understand the silence better than most people did. One day, a visiting scholar noticed the dog resting by the zendo door. He laughed and said, "How strange that you let a dog into a place of spiritual practice. What can a dog possibly know of emptiness?" The abbot, hearing this, smiled gently. "Follow him. See for yourself." Curious, the scholar quietly trailed the dog as it wandered through the temple grounds. The dog moved slowly, stopping now and then to sit and watch. Watch the breeze move the trees, the koi ripple the pond, the incense curl through the air. He watched without judgment, without reaching, without needing anything. Eventually, the dog lay down beneath the Bodhi tree and closed his eyes. The scholar stood there, unsure of what he had just witnessed. He returned to the abbot and said, "He didn't do anything." The abbot replied, "Exactly. He does not chase. He does not cling. He does not carry yesterday or search for tomorrow. He simply is. And in that, he knows emptiness far more deeply than those who try to understand it." The scholar sat in silence, humbled. He had studied hundreds of texts, filled his mind with theories. But this dog, with no words at all, had shown him the stillness he had been seeking. From then on, the dog was not seen as a stray, but as a teacher. The monks called him sunya, the word for emptiness, not as lack, but as space, as presence. Moral of the story: true emptiness is not about having nothing, it is about needing nothing. Like the dog who simply watched, lived, and breathed, peace is found not in knowing more, but in letting go. In being fully here, without clinging, we become free. The dream before waking. In a small temple surrounded by soft hills and drifting mist, a young monk often found himself haunted by dreams. Each night, as he slept on his mat beneath the flickering candlelight, vivid images would fill his mind of places he'd never been, people he couldn't name, and fears he didn't understand. One morning, after a long, restless night, he went to the elder monk with tired eyes. "Master," he said, "I dream so much. I wake feeling heavy, confused, sometimes even sad. What do these dreams mean?" The elder monk handed him a cup of warm tea and said gently, "Dreams are the stories the mind tells when no one is watching. But what matters most is not what happens in the dream, it's what you do when you wake." The young monk frowned. "But they feel real. Sometimes I wake and still carry the sorrow." The elder nodded. "Because part of you believes they belong to you. But all dreams fade. That is their nature. The trouble begins when we try to hold on to what was never meant to last. even in waking life. He led the young monk to the meditation hall, where the first light of morning filtered through the windows. "This moment," he said, "is also a kind of dream, passing, changing, full of feeling. But if you meet it with presence, you can awaken within it." The young monk sat in stillness, watching the light shift across the floor. He let the memories of the dream rise and fall without clinging. For the first time, he didn't try to make sense of them. He just breathed, letting them pass like clouds after a storm. As the bell rang softly in the distance, he opened his eyes and whispered, "I feel awake." The elder smiled. "Then the dream has served its purpose." From that day on, the monk no longer feared his dreams. He saw them as gentle teachers, not of truth, but of letting go. And each morning he greeted the world not as something fixed, but as something fleeting, beautiful, and worth meeting fully awake. Moral of the story: life, like dreams, is fleeting and full of passing shapes. Peace comes not from controlling what we see, but from waking fully to what is. When we stop clinging to what fades, we discover the beauty of simply being here, awake in the now. The bell ringer who listened. At the top of a stone tower, nestled in the highest corner of a remote monastery, lived an old monk whose only task was to ring the great bronze bell each morning before sunrise. For decades, he had performed this duty with quiet devotion, never missing a day, never rushing, never late. Each strike of the bell echoed through the valley, waking monks and villagers, calling them to prayer, to work, to presence. People said the sound carried something deeper than just metal on metal. It carried stillness. One morning, a new monk, full of energy and eager to serve, climbed the tower and asked to take over the task. "It's simple," he said. "Anyone can strike a bell." The old bell ringer smiled, but said nothing. He stepped aside and allowed the young monk to lift the rope. The monk pulled hard. The bell rang, loud, clear, strong, but something felt different. The valley echoed, yes, but the sound was sharp, cold, and quickly faded. The young monk looked confused. "I did it just as you do." The old monk nodded gently. "You struck the bell, but you did not listen to it." He placed a hand on the rope and closed his eyes. He waited, not for silence, but for something deeper. Then, with breath in sync with the moment, he gave the bell a slow, deliberate pull. This time the sound rose like morning mist, soft at first, then spreading wide. It lingered in the air, wrapped in silence. It felt alive. "You see," he said quietly, "the bell does not just want to be struck. It wants to be heard, and to hear it fully, you must be silent within yourself. If your mind is loud, the sound becomes just noise. But if your heart is still, the bell will speak to you." The young monk lowered his head, realizing that he had come to perform, but not to receive. From that day on, he returned not to ring the bell, but to listen first. And only when the moment was fully still would he raise his hand and let the sound rise from silence. Moral of the story: real presence begins not in what we do, but in how we listen. Like the bell, life speaks most deeply when we are quiet inside. When we strike without stillness, we create noise. But when we act from silence, even the smallest sound becomes sacred. The raindrops lessen. One late summer afternoon, a young monk stood beneath the eaves of the temple, watching the rain fall in steady rhythm. Each drop landed softly on the earth, on the leaves, on the stone steps, and vanished the moment it touched. He watched hundreds, thousands fall, each one brief, each one silent. He turned to the elder monk beside him and asked, "What is the point of a raindrop if it disappears so quickly?" The elder smiled, his eyes following the gentle trail of water slipping from the roof. "Come," he said, and led the young monk to the garden where the rain soaked deep into the soil. The flowers were open, the air smelled of life, and small rivulets formed quiet paths down the hill. The elder crouched and scooped a bit of earth into his hand. "This," he said, "is made from thousands of raindrops that gave themselves fully and never asked to last." The young monk looked down. A single raindrop struck his palm and vanished. He barely felt it. Yet now he saw it differently. That one drop was part of a stream, a river, a growing tree, a blooming petal. Gone, but not lost. The elder continued, "Many people want to be remembered, to be great, to leave something behind. But sometimes it is enough to nourish one moment, a kind word, a breath of patience, a silent prayer. Like the raindrop, we may not be seen for long, but our presence matters more than we know." The young monk stood in the rain, arms open, face lifted. For the first time, he didn't rush inside. He let the drops soak through his robes, knowing each one was doing what it came to do, simply fall, fully, without resistance. He smiled. That evening, he swept the temple steps without thought of praise, offered tea without needing thanks, and bowed to the rain still falling beyond the open door. Moral of the story: our lives, like raindrops, may be brief, but they are never without meaning. When we give ourselves fully to each moment, without needing to be remembered, we nourish the world in quiet, lasting ways. Disappearing does not mean we never mattered. The tree that bowed. In a valley shaped by wind and time, there stood a tree unlike the others. While the tall pines reached proudly for the sky and the wide oaks held their ground with solid roots, this one tree bent gently to the side as if forever caught in a graceful bow. Its trunk curved low and its branches swept downward in quiet humility. Many passed by without noticing it. Others mocked it, calling it broken or weak. "Stand tall," they said. "You'll never grow strong if you keep bending." But the tree did not resist. It simply bowed deeper with each passing season, its leaves dancing softly in the breeze. One summer, a great storm swept through the valley, violent winds, roaring skies, trees cracking under the pressure. The proudest trees, tall and stiff, fought the storm with all their might. Many were split, uprooted, or shattered. When the storm passed, the valley was changed. Silence hung heavy over fallen trunks and broken branches. But the tree that bowed still stood. Bent, yes, but unharmed. It had swayed with the storm, not against it. It had yielded, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. A young monk from the nearby monastery came upon the tree in the days after the storm. He sat beneath its curved branches and felt something in his chest soften. He, too, had been taught to stand tall, always be strong, never waver. But now, surrounded by fallen giants and this one humble tree, he understood something new. He placed his hand on its trunk and whispered, "You survived not by fighting, but by yielding." The tree made no sound, and yet it spoke to him. From that day forward, the monk practiced bowing, not just with his body, but with his heart. He bowed to joy and sorrow, to beauty and loss, not in defeat, but in reverence. And in each bow, he found strength not in standing tall, but in knowing when to bend. Moral of the story: true strength lies not in resistance, but in surrender. Like the tree that bowed, we endure life's storms not by fighting every wind, but by yielding with grace. In softness, there is resilience. In humility, there is peace, the brush that never drew. In the quiet corner of a temple near a river's bend, a young monk trained in the art of calligraphy. Each morning, he dipped his brush into ink and copied sacred words with delicate care. He longed to one day create a perfect scroll, one that would hang in the meditation hall, one that others would pause to admire in silence. But his lines were never quite right. His strokes trembled. The ink sometimes ran too dark or too thin. Each time he finished a piece, he would look at it and sigh, then set it aside, ashamed. One day, he went to the head monk with a question heavy in his heart. "Master," he said, holding up a blank scroll, "what do I do when I'm afraid my next stroke will not be good enough?" The master took the scroll and the brush, but instead of writing, he set them down untouched. "This," he said, gesturing to the brush, "is what fear creates, not failure, but silence, stillness without peace." The young monk frowned. "But if I make a mistake, the ink will remain. I can't undo it." The master nodded. "True, but is a life meant to be lived without marks, without movement? Would you rather have a scroll with no errors, or no story?" He placed the blank scroll on the altar. This is the brush that never drew. It feared being wrong more than it loved the act of creating. It chose safety over truth. The young monk felt his chest ache. He had thought perfection was the goal, but now he saw what it had cost him. He had missed the joy of the brush moving, the dance between breath and ink, the honesty of an imperfect stroke. That evening he returned to his mat, lit a small candle and picked up his brush. His hand still trembled, but this time he did not wait. The lines he drew were uneven, but they were alive, honest, his. And as the ink dried, he bowed, not to the work, but to the courage it took to begin. Moral of the story: the fear of imperfection can silence the soul. Like a brush that never draws, we lose more by holding back than by making a flawed mark. Peace comes not from perfect strokes, but from the bravery to create, to try, and to live fully, even with trembling hands. The rope untied itself. In a quiet temple by a wide river, there lived a monk who had once been a man of war. Before he shaved his head and donned the robe, he had tied many knots, knots of anger, pride, and control. When he came to the monastery, he brought with him a single rope from his old life. He tied it tightly and kept it in his room, a quiet symbol of all he had once clung to. Years passed. He prayed, meditated, served tea, swept the garden. Outwardly, he had changed. But deep within, he still held tightly to his past. Memories of power, moments of guilt, people he could not forgive. One day, a novice entered his room and saw the tightly coiled rope resting on the altar. "Why keep this?" the novice asked. "What is it for?" The monk looked at the rope and said, "This was once my way of holding on. I tied it myself to remember who I was." The novice blinked. "But it only sits there. You never use it." The monk smiled, but said nothing. That night, something strange happened. A soft breeze slipped through the open window. The candlelight flickered and the silence deepened. And without anyone touching it, the rope, dry and weathered by time, unraveled. Slowly, almost like a breath, the knot came loose. The strands fell apart, curling gently like they had waited years for permission to let go. In the morning, the monk entered his room and found the rope untied. He sat down beside it, stunned, but not in fear. Instead, something inside him exhaled, not because he had let go, but because perhaps it had finally let go of him. He didn't tie it again. He gathered the rope with care and carried it to the river. He placed it in the water and watched it drift quietly away, light as forgiveness. Later, he told the novice, "Sometimes we cling without knowing, and sometimes when the heart is ready, even the tightest knots undo themselves." Moral of the story: letting go doesn't always happen through force. Often, it comes quietly. When the heart is soft enough, the grip loosens on its own. Like a rope that unties itself, healing often begins when we no longer need to hold on. The candle that smiled. In the heart of a small stone temple, nestled between the mountains, there was a single candle that burned each night on the altar. It was not grand or tall, just a simple, handmade candle in a clay dish. Yet, for those who sat near it, something in its flame felt different. It didn't just flicker, it seemed to glow with warmth that reached deeper than the skin, as though the flame itself was smiling. A young monk, curious and sensitive, began to notice this. Each evening during meditation, he would find himself drawn to the candle's light, not distracted, but comforted. While his mind wandered and returned, the flame remained steady, soft, alive. One night, after the others had gone to sleep, he stayed behind. He sat before the candle and whispered, "Why does your light feel so kind?" Of course, the candle did not speak, but in the silence, in the flickering gold, something stirred in him. He remembered how the candle was lit each evening, not with fanfare, not with rush. A simple flame passed from one wick to another. The candle never asked to shine, it simply did, because that was its nature. He thought of his own heart, how often he had hidden it, waiting to be sure he was wise enough, calm enough, worthy enough to bring comfort to others. But the candle had no such fears. It did not burn to impress. It did not fear melting. It gave its warmth fully, without question, without condition. The next morning, the young monk spoke with the elder. "I think I understand," he said quietly. "The candle smiles because it is not afraid to give itself away." The elder placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Yes, real light doesn't ask if it's enough. It simply shines where it is." From that day on, the young monk smiled more easily, not because he felt perfect, but because he stopped waiting to be. Moral of the story: Kindness is not something we earn, it's something we allow to rise. Like a candle that smiles through its flame, we bring warmth to the world, not by being flawless, but by giving from the heart, exactly as we are. No water in the reflection. At the edge of the monastery grounds lay a still, shallow pond. The monks called it the mirror of the mind, for on calm days it reflected everything: trees, clouds, sky, and the faces of those who leaned over it. One young monk, troubled by his thoughts, came to the pond each day. His mind felt heavy, cluttered with self-doubt, regret, and endless questions. He stared into the reflection, hoping to find clarity, hoping the pond would reveal who he truly was. But the more he looked, the more uncertain he became. "I don't understand," he confessed to the elder monk one afternoon. "I see my face, but I don't see peace. I see the sky, but I don't feel its openness. I'm only seeing the surface, nothing deeper." The elder walked to the pond's edge and looked into the water. Then he gently stirred it with a twig. The reflection rippled and disappeared. "Tell me," he said, "where did the sky go?" The young monk replied, "It's still there, but the water's too disturbed to show it." The elder nodded. "Exactly. When the mind is restless, we mistake the reflection for the truth. We think what we see is what we are. But the pond is not the sky. It is not the trees, and the reflection is not the water." The young monk sat with the words, letting them settle. He had spent so long chasing meaning in what appeared on the surface: his face, his failures, his thoughts, forgetting that none of it was the water itself. "Then what am I really?" he whispered. The elder monk smiled gently. "You are not what flickers in the surface. You are the stillness beneath it, not the reflection, the depth." From that day on, the young monk returned to the pond not to see, but to be. He stopped searching his reflection for answers. He sat in silence and let the water settle, let the thoughts pass, and with time felt the peace that had always been there, beyond the image, beyond the mind. Moral of the story: what we see on the surface, our thoughts, emotions, even our reflection, is not the whole truth. Like a pond reflecting the sky, the mind shows many things, but it is not those things. True peace lies beneath the image, in the still water that holds no shape, yet contains everything. A monk and the mountain's echo. High above the clouds, nestled in a quiet range where the wind whispered through the pines, lived a monk who had taken a vow of silence. He spoke to no one, not out of pride, but out of reverence. He believed that truth could be heard more clearly in the quiet than in words. One day, while sweeping the temple steps, he looked out across the valley and cried out, not with words, but with a long, low sound from deep within his chest. A sound not of pain nor joy, just something true. It rolled across the cliffs, deep and full. Moments later, the mountain answered back. The echo returned, his own voice but softer, stretched by distance, shaped by time. He stood very still. For the first time in many years, he whispered aloud, "Is this what truth sounds like?" The echo replied, "Like." He laughed gently, then called again, "Who am I?" The mountain returned, "Am I? I?" Each word that came back was his own, yet no longer his. changed, echoed, reflected by the world. He sat down, overwhelmed by the simplicity of it. All his life, he had thought that silence was the absence of sound, but now he saw. It was the space where sound becomes honest. In that wide stillness, even a whisper could stretch across the sky and return transformed. The next day, a novice approached and asked, "Master, why do you speak to the mountain?" The monk pointed to his chest. "Because sometimes we don't know what's inside," he said softly, "until we hear it come back to us." And so, each morning, the monk would send one sound into the vastness, not to be answered, but to listen. To hear how the world reshaped his own voice. To understand himself, not by looking in, but by reaching out and hearing what returned. Moral of the story: what we speak into the world reflects who we are. Like a mountain echo, our words, thoughts, and actions return to us, often softer, sometimes clearer. When we learn to listen deeply, even to ourselves, we discover not just sound, but meaning, not just noise, but truth. The bird that forgot to fly. In the quiet courtyard of a mountain temple, there lived a small bird with soft grey feathers. The monks had found it as a hatchling, fallen from its nest after a storm. They cared for it gently, feeding it grains and keeping it warm through winter. It grew, healed, and eventually gained strong wings, but the bird never flew. Each morning, it would hop around the stones, peck at seeds, and rest in the sunlight. The sky stretched above it, endless, blue, calling, but it never left the ground. It had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, what its wings were meant for. One day, a young monk sat beside it and asked the elder, "Why doesn't the bird fly? It's strong now. The sky is waiting." The elder watched the bird, quiet and calm. Because when it was broken, it learned to feel safe close to the earth. And sometimes, when healing takes a long time, we begin to believe that safety means staying small. The young monk looked down, feeling something stir in his heart. He too had known pain, not from a storm, but from harsh words and deep loneliness. And like the bird, he had learned to stay low, to avoid the vastness of his own possibility. But what if it never remembers? He asked. The elder placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then we wait, not with force, but with love. One day, when the wind is just right and the heart is ready, the sky will feel like home again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the wind began to rise. The bird stood still, feathers ruffling, eyes lifted. And then, without warning, it opened its wings, not perfectly, not high, but enough to catch the air. It rose a few feet, wobbled, and landed. But it had left the ground. The young monk wept, not because the bird flew, but because it had tried. Moral of the story: healing takes time, and sometimes we forget the wings we were born with. But even after pain, the sky still waits. When we meet ourselves with patience and courage, even the smallest lift is a beginning, and every beginning is sacred. The child who never asked why. In a quiet village near a forest path, there lived a small child who often wandered through the temple grounds. While others asked questions, argued over scriptures, and searched for meaning, this child simply watched. The sky, the trees, the ants moving in lines across stone. The monks grew fond of the child's presence. He never interrupted, never demanded, never tried to impress. He sat near the elder monk during teachings, listening without writing anything down, his eyes wide and still. One day, a scholar visited the temple, filled with curiosity and knowledge. He heard of the child and was amazed. "Surely a child so quiet must be full of questions," he said. The elder monk shook his head. "He never asks why." The scholar frowned. "But isn't why the beginning of wisdom?" The monk smiled. "Sometimes, but not always. Some look for answers to prove something. Others look so hard, they miss what's already here." Intrigued, the scholar approached the child, who sat watching raindrops slide down a lotus leaf. "Why are you staring at the rain?" he asked. The child turned to him and smiled. "Because it's falling." Nothing more. The scholar chuckled. "Don't you want to know why it falls? Or how?" The child looked at the leaf again. "It falls because it does, and I want to feel it, not chase it." The scholar stood in silence, unsure how to respond. He suddenly felt how loud his mind had always been, full of theories, thoughts, and endless needing. But here was a child, content with what simply is. Later, as the rain passed and the air grew still, the elder monk said, "There is a wisdom deeper than questioning. It is the wisdom of presence. This child carries it not because he knows more, but because he needs less." And the scholar, for the first time in many years, sat down without his books, without his questions. He simply listened, to the wind, to the breath, to the silence between thoughts. Moral of the story: not all wisdom is found by asking. Some truths reveal themselves when we stop needing to know and begin to simply be. Like the child who never asked why, peace is found not in answers, but in presence. A robe sewn from fog. In a quiet village where the morning fog hung low like breath across the hills, there lived a wandering monk who never wore the same robe twice. Each day, as the sun rose, villagers would see him wrapped in a robe that seemed to change with the light, grey, soft, weightless, like mist resting on his shoulders. Some said it was woven from clouds. Others believed it was only an illusion, but no one could explain it. One curious child asked the monk, "Where do you get your robes? They look like they're made of fog." The monk smiled gently and replied, "That's because they are." The child laughed, thinking it was a joke, but the monk only placed a hand over his heart and said, "When we wear what we cannot hold, we learn how to let go." Years later, that same child, now grown and restless with the weight of adulthood, sought out the monk again. "I've tried so hard to become someone," he said, "to build a name, a future, a life that lasts, but it all feels heavy. Nothing stays. It's like I'm chasing fog." The monk nodded. "That's because you are." He led the man to the edge of a hill where the mist wrapped around their ankles and drifted through their robes. "You think meaning comes from holding on," the monk said, "but true peace is worn like fog, gently, briefly, without clinging. It's felt, not owned." The man looked out over the valley, the fog rising and falling like breath. He realized how tightly he'd been gripping his ideas of success, identity, and purpose, trying to stitch a life from fabric that was never meant to be caught. That morning, as the fog lifted and light poured in, he let something inside him loosen. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The monk placed a hand on his back and said, "The robe I wear isn't made to last. It's made to remind that everything you are, your past, your name, your fears, can drift away like mist, and still you will remain." Moral of the story: we spend our lives trying to hold what is meant to pass. But peace comes not from grasping, but from allowing. Like a robe sewn from fog, life is beautiful in its softness and sacred in its impermanence. When we stop clinging, we begin to feel truly free. The temple with no walls. Beyond the forest, where the hills rolled like waves and the wind moved freely without path or pause, travelers spoke of a strange temple. It had no roof, no walls, no gate, no statues or golden altars, just open space, soft grass, and a large stone at the center where a monk sat each day in stillness. Many who heard of it were skeptical. "How can it be a temple without walls?" they asked. "Where are the scriptures, the incense, the sacred things?" But those who visited never forgot it. One morning, a curious pilgrim arrived, carrying a bag full of offerings. He bowed to the monk and asked, "Where may I leave these gifts for the Buddha?" The monk smiled, gesturing to the earth around them. "Leave them where your heart feels most quiet." The pilgrim looked around. "But there is no altar." The monk closed his eyes. "The wind does not need permission to enter. The sky does not ask for a roof. The sacred lives not inside stone, but inside attention." Still puzzled, the pilgrim sat beside him. For hours they remained in silence, birds calling overhead, clouds drifting slowly by, the sun rising and falling. The air felt clear, the earth beneath them warm and steady. At some point, the pilgrim whispered, "I've never felt this before." The monk opened his eyes. "That is the temple, and you never had to enter it. You only had to arrive." Tears filled the pilgrim's eyes. All his life, he had gone from shrine to shrine, searching for something to lift the weight inside him. But here, with nothing around him but sky and breath and being, he finally felt home. He left the offerings behind, not out of duty, but from peace. Not to earn something, but to give thanks for what he already carried within. Moral of the story: the sacred does not live in walls or objects. It lives in presence. When we stop searching for temples built by hands and begin to notice the temple built by stillness, we find that peace has always been with us, open and waiting. The song the wind forgot. In a quiet valley where trees bent gently and grass whispered with each passing breeze, there once lived a monk known for his voice. His chants, soft and steady, rose with the wind and drifted down through the hills like a lullaby. Villagers would pause in their work just to listen. Children would close their eyes, smiling. Even the birds seemed to pause in flight when his voice touched the air. But one season, the monk fell silent. No illness, no sorrow, only stillness. He no longer sang. He sat beneath the old Bodhi tree each morning, eyes closed, lips unmoving. The villagers noticed, and one day a young girl approached him with wide eyes and a heavy heart. "Why don't you sing any more?" she asked. "The wind seems quieter without you." The monk opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "Because the wind has forgotten the song." She frowned. "But the wind only carried it. It was you who gave it voice." He shook his head gently. "The song never belonged to me. I only let it pass through." She sat beside him in silence, unsure, hoping he might begin again. But he did not. Days passed, then weeks. The valley felt heavier, as though the trees leaned a little lower, the air moved more slowly. And then, one evening, without warning, the wind rose, not loudly, but softly, like a breath remembering how to move. The monk stood and faced the wind. He closed his eyes, and this time he did not sing. He listened, and in the quiet hush the girl heard it too, a faint hum, deep and old. Not a song with words or melody, but something in the movement of leaves, the hush of air between stones, the echo of presence. The monk turned to her. "Sometimes," he said, "the song must fall silent, so we can remember it was never ours to begin with." That night, no one heard the monk's voice, but the wind carried a peace through the valley, soft, steady, enough. Moral of the story: true beauty is not in the sound we make, but in the space we leave for the world to sing through us. When we stop needing to be heard, we begin to hear everything, and in that stillness, the forgotten song returns. The gift of not receiving. In a quiet town shaded by cherry trees, a monk visited the home of a wealthy man who had invited him for tea. The man was known for his generosity. He gave to temples, supported festivals, and was praised by many for his charitable acts. But something in his smile was always tight, his voice always just a little too loud, like someone trying to be seen more than understood. As they sat together on a polished veranda, the man poured tea and said proudly, "I give wherever I can. I believe giving is the path to peace." The monk bowed in thanks, sipping his tea with calm appreciation, but the man looked disappointed. "You do not say much," he said. "Most guests praise me for my kindness." The monk looked at him with gentle eyes. "Would you like me to praise you?" The man hesitated. "I suppose I expected some gratitude." The monk nodded slowly, then stood. "May I offer you something in return?" The man smiled. "Of course." The monk reached into his robe and held out an empty hand. "Here, take this." The man blinked. "There's nothing there." "Exactly," the monk said softly. "What happens when you reach for something and find it's not being given?" The man looked puzzled. "I feel uncomfortable, confused, maybe even insulted." The monk's hand remained outstretched. "That is how your giving feels to others when it is wrapped in the need to be praised." The man's face fell, not in shame, but in awakening. The monk withdrew his hand and sat again. True giving leaves no debt. It seeks nothing in return. The deepest gift is the one that expects no gratitude. In that space, both giver and receiver are free. The cherry blossoms drifted gently between them. The wind carried no reward, yet it gave its coolness without question. The man looked at his hands, once so eager to offer, now still and quiet. He poured the monk more tea, this time without a word. Moral of the story: giving is not about being thanked. It is about releasing, expecting nothing. When we let go of the need to be seen, our generosity becomes pure. In not receiving praise, we receive something greater: freedom. A name, written in smoke. In a quiet monastery by the edge of a burning field, a young monk watched as the villagers set fire to dry grass for renewal. The flames moved like golden waves, fierce yet controlled, clearing space for new life to grow. Above it all, smoke curled into the sky, shifting, vanishing, reshaping itself with every breath of wind. The monk turned to his teacher and asked, "Why do I feel so afraid of being forgotten?" The teacher, an old man with eyes soft as ash, looked into the sky. "Because you believe your name is something that must stay," he said, "something to carve into stone." The young monk lowered his gaze. "But if I do not leave something behind, my work, my voice, my name, was my life still worth living?" The teacher said nothing, but walked to the fire's edge. He picked up a stick, dipped it in the soot, and traced the young monk's name into the air, one slow motion after another. The letters hung in the sunlight, dark and ghost-like, until the wind carried them away. "Did you see it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk replied quietly. "And now?" "It's gone." The teacher looked at him gently. "That is how all things are, including names. We write them in fire, in wind, in the hearts of others, but never in permanence. And yet, the fire still warms, the smoke still rises. The moment was real." The monk's chest ached, not with sadness, but with a kind of freedom he had never known. All his life he had tried to leave a mark, prove his place, become someone. But now, watching the sky clear and open again, he realized maybe it was enough simply to be, to live with care, and let the wind carry whatever remained. He closed his eyes and felt the breeze on his skin. Moral of the story: we spend much of life trying to be remembered, fearing we'll vanish like smoke. But peace comes when we let go of permanence and live with presence. A name may fade, but the warmth we leave behind, the kindness, the truth, the love, endures in ways no stone ever could. The bowl that waited. At a modest temple where the trees whispered even in stillness, each monk carried a single wooden bowl. It was more than just a vessel for food. It was a companion, a symbol of humility, of trust in the world. Each morning they walked barefoot through the village, bowls in hand, receiving whatever was freely given. But one young monk began to notice something. While others' bowls filled with rice, soup, or fruit, his often remained empty. Day after day, he returned with barely a few grains. Doubt crept into his heart. Was I not kind enough? Not worthy enough? One morning, after yet another silent round through the village, he returned with nothing. He sat beneath a fig tree, his bowl untouched, his stomach hollow. He stared into the empty wood and whispered, "What's the point of waiting if nothing comes?" The elder monk joined him quietly. Without asking, he placed his own bowl beside the young monk's. It was also empty. The younger monk looked up, surprised. "You too?" The elder smiled. "Yes, today the village had little. Tomorrow may be different, but the bowl still waits." He picked up the young monk's bowl and held it to the light. "Look closely. It is not empty, it is open. There's a difference." The young monk blinked. "But I feel ashamed. I feel less." The elder placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your worth is not measured by what fills the bowl, but by your willingness to hold it open. Most people only open their hearts when they're certain of receiving. But you've stayed open, even in emptiness. That is strength." A breeze stirred. Leaves danced. The monk looked into his bowl again, not with hunger, but with gratitude. It had taught him something the fullest bowls never could: how to remain soft in the absence of reward, how to wait with dignity, and how to trust the quiet rhythm of life. Moral of the story? True openness does not depend on what we receive. Like a bowl that waits, peace lives in the willingness to stay open, even when nothing comes. In that space, we discover patience, humility, and the quiet power of trust. The Sleeping Buddha's Breath. In a hidden cave carved into the belly of a mountain, there lay a great stone Buddha in deep repose, eyes closed, hands resting gently, face serene. Locals called it the Sleeping Buddha, and pilgrims came from far and wide to see it. Some offered flowers, others whispered prayers, and many waited quietly, hoping for some sign, some blessing from the unmoving figure. Among them was a monk, young and restless, who had traveled for days with a heart full of questions. He had studied the teachings, memorized the sutras, and meditated until his legs ached. But still he felt unsettled. If awakening is real, he thought, why do I still feel so far from it? He sat before the great Buddha statue and asked silently, "What am I missing? What more must I do?" The cave was silent. The Buddha, as always, slept. Hours passed. Daylight faded, and the wind began to hum softly at the cave's mouth. The monk, exhausted, laid his head on a folded robe and drifted into sleep beneath the gaze of stone. And in the quiet, something changed. Not a voice, not a vision, just a breath. Soft and steady, barely there, yet unmistakable. A rhythm like waves on the shore, like wind moving through trees, like the heartbeat of the world itself. It wasn't coming from the statue, it wasn't coming from the cave, it was coming from within. The monk woke, but didn't move. He listened, not with his ears, but with his being. And he realized the Buddha was never truly asleep. The stillness was not lifeless. It was alive with presence. The breath he had heard was not the Buddha's. It was his own, and for the first time it felt sacred. He wept, not from sorrow, but from a quiet joy. He had traveled far to find a truth that had never left him. Moral of the story: awakening is not something distant or dramatic. Like the breath of the sleeping Buddha, it is already within us, gentle, constant, waiting to be noticed. When we finally stop searching outside, we hear the quiet truth that has always lived inside our own breath. One eye opened, one let go. In the mountains where clouds touched the trees and silence settled like snow, a monk lived alone in a stone hut. He had taken a vow to meditate for 7 years, devoting himself to seeing clearly, to understanding truth, suffering, and the nature of the self. Each morning, he sat facing the rising sun, eyes half open, breath slow, body still. He believed, as many taught, that awakening would come when he saw fully, when nothing remained hidden and everything was understood. And so he watched. He watched his thoughts rise and fall, watched emotions stir and pass, watched the world without judgment. But still, something inside remained tight. The more he tried to see clearly, the more distant peace felt. His eyes were open, but his heart stayed clenched. One night, as the wind howled outside and the candle beside him flickered low, he dreamed of standing at the edge of a vast ocean. In his dream, he strained to see what lay across the water. He squinted, searched, tried to focus, but the horizon blurred. A voice from the waves whispered, "What you seek isn't across the sea. It's in the act of not needing to see." He woke in the dark, heart still, and for the first time he closed one eye, not in sleep, but in surrender. He sat again the next morning, one eye open to the world, one eye gently closed. With each breath, he let go of needing to know, to grasp, to figure it out. He let go of watching so hard. And as he did, something inside softened. A warmth bloomed in his chest, not from knowledge, but from release. He wasn't chasing truth anymore. He was resting in it. One eye stayed open to the passing world, the other turned inward, towards silence, towards stillness. And in that balance of awareness and surrender, he found what years of effort had not given him: peace. Moral of the story: awakening is not only about seeing, it's also about letting go. When we soften our need to understand everything, we create space for true clarity. Like one eye opened and one gently closed, wisdom is found where effort meets surrender. The mountain without a peak. In the heart of a remote valley, there rose a strange and sacred mountain, unlike the others around it. Proud, sharp, and crowned with snow, this mountain had no peak. It seemed to stretch toward the sky endlessly, its top always hidden behind mist, never touched by sun, never reached by climbers. For generations, monks told stories about this mountain. Some believed the peak had crumbled long ago. Others said it had never existed at all. But one old master often said, "That mountain teaches more than any summit ever could." One day, a young monk decided to climb it. He had trained for years, strong in body and firm in mind. "I will reach the top," he declared, "and when I do, I will know peace." He set out at sunrise, confident and steady. Days passed, then weeks. The forest gave way to stone, the birds to wind, the clear paths to scattered rocks. Still, he climbed, but no matter how high he went, the peak remained hidden, always just above, always out of reach. He grew tired, frustrated. "Why won't it end?" he cried into the fog. "Where is the top?" Just then, he met a weathered monk sitting calmly on a flat rock, smiling as if he had been waiting. "Have you reached the summit?" the young monk asked. The elder shook his head gently. "There is no summit, only the step you are on." "But I need to arrive," the young monk said, trembling. "I need to complete the climb." The elder pointed to the mist swirling around them. "You already have. Every step you take in presence is the destination. A mountain with no peak teaches the greatest truth. Peace is not found in arriving, it is found in walking without needing to." The young monk sat down. His heart pounded, not from exhaustion, but from release. He had spent his life climbing towards something imagined, never realizing that the journey itself held everything he had been chasing. For the first time, he felt still. Moral of the story: the need to arrive keeps us from peace. Like a mountain with no peak, life is not a summit to conquer, but a path to walk with presence. When we let go of the goal, we begin to see the beauty in each step, and the journey becomes enough. A cup with no bottom. In a quiet temple shaded by plum trees, a young monk was known for his hunger, not for food, but for wisdom. He read every scroll, questioned every teaching, and sought every answer with restless energy. He believed that once he filled himself with enough knowledge, enough truth, he would finally feel whole. One day, the head monk gave him a strange gift, a handmade clay cup, rough around the edges, but beautiful in its own way. The young monk bowed politely, confused by the simplicity of the offering. But when he poured tea into it, something odd happened. The tea disappeared. It trickled through a small, near invisible hole at the bottom of the cup, draining out completely. No matter how much he poured, the cup never filled. Frustrated, the monk returned to the elder. "Master, this cup is broken. It cannot hold anything." The master smiled gently. "Is it broken, or is it showing you something?" The young monk frowned. "I don't understand." The master sat beside him. "You try to fill yourself with knowledge, hoping it will satisfy your emptiness. But like this cup, whatever enters quickly leaks away. Because you do not drink, you only pour. You collect, but do not absorb." The monk looked at the dripping cup, then at his own heart. He realized how often he had raced from teaching to teaching, never resting, never allowing silence to settle. He had been afraid to stop, afraid to feel the emptiness beneath the searching. The elder continued, "To drink deeply from life, you must stop pouring and start being. Stop chasing and start listening. Only then will the bottom of your cup appear." That evening, the young monk sat quietly in the garden, the empty cup resting in his palm. He did not try to fix it. He simply breathed, and slowly the endless leaking within him began to still. Moral of the story: filling ourselves is not the same as being full. Like a cup with no bottom, the mind that only gathers without reflection will never be satisfied. When we stop chasing and begin to sit with what is, true understanding begins to hold. Silence shared between stones. In the courtyard of a quiet monastery, there was a circle of stones, 12 of them, smooth and worn by years of wind and weather. They had no names, no markings, no special history. But every morning, one old monk would sit among them in silence, placing his hands gently on their surfaces, as if listening. A novice, curious and eager to learn, approached him one day. "Master," he said softly, "why do you sit with these stones? They do not speak. They do not move. What can they teach you?" The old monk smiled and patted the ground beside him. "Sit and listen." They sat in stillness. The wind moved gently through the courtyard. Birds called from a distance. A leaf fell. Time passed. The novice began to fidget. "I hear nothing," he whispered. "Exactly," the old monk said. And yet, you are hearing everything. He ran his hand over a stone, its surface cool and quiet. These stones do not ask to be more than they are. They do not chase meaning, nor carry stories, but they are fully here, present, and in their stillness they remind me of the silence I forget I need. The novice looked at the circle again. The stones did not offer answers or lessons or praise, but somehow he felt their calmness enter him, as if their silence made space for something deeper to rise. The old monk closed his eyes. When I sit with them, I remember I don't need to explain myself to the world. I don't need to perform. I only need to be still and true. The novice said nothing more. He placed his hand on the stone beside him and for the first time didn't search for meaning. He just sat, breathing, feeling, being. And in that quiet, he heard something, not in words, not in sound, but in the peace that opened between one heartbeat and the next. Moral of the story: wisdom does not always come in words. Like silence shared between stones, some truths are felt, not spoken. When we stop filling the space, we begin to hear the quiet voice of presence, the one that was always waiting beneath the noise, the river who became the sea. There once was a river, born from the melting snows of high mountains. It flowed with purpose, twisting through forests, valleys, and villages, always moving, always seeking. The river believed that one day it would arrive at a place where it could finally rest, where it could stop running and simply be. Along its journey, it asked the trees, "Where does peace live?" The trees replied, "Perhaps where you stop moving." It asked the rocks, "Where is the end?" The rocks answered, "Keep flowing, you'll know." But the river grew tired. With each bend, it found more to carry: silt, fallen leaves, memories of storms. "Why can't I just stop?" it cried. "Why can't I hold on to the beauty I pass?" And then, one day, the river saw something ahead. Not land, not a lake, but endless openness, the sea. Panic rose. "If I go forward, I'll lose myself," the river thought. "I'll disappear." It hesitated, but the sea whispered gently, "You are not ending, you are becoming." The river, with trembling waves, took one last breath and let go. And as it met the vast, quiet expanse of the ocean, something incredible happened. It didn't vanish, it expanded. It felt the wind above, the salt in the air, the pull of tides. It was still the river, but now more. No longer confined by its banks, no longer defined by where it came from or what it carried. It had become something deeper, something whole. Far inland, monks walking by the river's former path noticed the stillness in the air that day, as if something sacred had just passed through. Moral of the story: letting go feels like losing ourselves, but often it is how we become who we truly are. Like the river that feared becoming the sea, we find peace not by holding on, but by flowing forward with trust. The end is not the end, it is the beginning of something greater. The empty chair in the garden. At the far edge of the temple garden, beneath an old apricot tree, there sat a single wooden chair. It was plain, weathered by rain and softened by sun, but always clean, always waiting. No one ever sat in it for long, yet no one dared move it either. The monks simply called it the empty chair. A new novice noticed it one morning during walking meditation. Curious, he asked the elder monk, "Why do we keep a chair that no one uses?" The elder smiled gently. "It is not for sitting, it is for remembering." The novice looked puzzled. "Remembering what?" The elder guided him to the chair. They stood beside it in silence as the wind moved through the branches above. Fallen petals rested on the seat like offerings. And then the elder spoke softly. "This chair is for anyone you are holding in your heart. The friend you miss, the loved one you lost, the version of yourself you've left behind. It is for grief without pressure, memory without weight." The novice felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of his mother, who had passed just before he entered the monastery. He had spoken little of her, fearing sorrow would disturb his training. But now, with the chair before him, tears came, not heavy, but gentle, like rain that the soil welcomes. The elder placed a hand on his shoulder. "We do not fill this chair. We honor it by letting it remain empty. It teaches us that we do not need to hold everything inside. There is space, even for what we cannot fix." That evening, the novice returned to the chair alone. He didn't sit. He simply stood beside it and whispered her name. He left a single apricot blossom on the seat, and in doing so, let go of something he had carried too tightly. The chair remained just as it always had, still open, ready. Moral of the story: grief, memory, and love need not be hidden. Like an empty chair in a quiet garden, we make peace not by filling what is lost, but by allowing space for it to be. In gentle remembering, we find quiet healing. The cat who understood stillness. At a monastery nestled in a quiet valley, there lived a small grey cat who had wandered in one winter and simply never left. The monks named her Neko. She roamed freely through the halls, slept on warm cushions, curled beside meditation mats, and was often found sitting silently in the sunlight, her eyes half closed, her breath soft and unhurried. The monks, always seeking to deepen their practice, soon began to notice something unusual about her. Neko never seemed to rush. She moved when she needed to, but never more. She ate without greed, sat without restlessness, and never once seemed to long for anything. She simply was. One day, a frustrated young monk threw down his mala beads in defeat. "I try to sit still, but my thoughts race like wild horses. I chase silence, but it runs from me. I want peace, but it hides." The abbot, watching Neko stretch gracefully in a patch of sun, said, "Then learn from her." The young monk blinked. "From the cat?" The abbot smiled. "Yes, watch not what she does, but what she doesn't." So the monk began to observe Neko. Day after day, he sat where she sat. He followed her without interfering, and slowly he began to notice. She did not fight stillness. She entered it naturally. She didn't chase calm, she allowed it. She didn't demand quiet, she welcomed it. She did not meditate, but she was meditation. One afternoon, the monk found himself sitting beside Neko under a plum tree. He wasn't thinking about breathing. He wasn't measuring his thoughts. He was simply there, like she was, present, at ease, alive. He looked at her and smiled. She blinked once, slowly, like a bow. From then on, the monk no longer strained for stillness. He returned to his practice not to force silence, but to join it, just as the cat had shown him. Moral of the story: peace doesn't come through force. Like the cat who moved with ease, stillness arises when we stop chasing and start allowing. Presence is not something we earn, it is something we return to, simply, softly, without trying. You've just journeyed through stories of stillness and surrender, echoes of monks, rivers, shadows, falling leaves, and even silent cats. Each tale whispered a truth, that peace doesn't come from holding on, but from letting go. Letting go of fear, control, past, pride, even the need to know why. From the quiet of a bowl waiting to be filled, to the smile left in sand, to the firefly's brief light guiding the way, every story was a breath, a pause, a soft reminder that the present moment is enough. You are enough. If one story opened something in you, no matter how small, we invite you to share it in the comments. Which one stayed with you? Which one helped you let go? And if this journey brought you even a moment of calm, subscribe to the channel. More stories, more stillness, more truth are already waiting, right here when you're ready to return. Let go and come back anytime.